Just to note that link you forwarded me, Jared, was not working, so I came in through the public webinar link. So I don't know if they're having that problem or if they've notified you that they would be
I'm
calling.
keeping my eyes on the attendee side for that reason.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, it's 9 o'clock. The meeting's recording.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attendance at this Marine Fish Advisory Commission meeting on November 10th. I guess we've got seven of the 9 members in attendance. I really have no introductions and announcements, but so we can review and approve the November 10th business meeting agenda. I need a motion for that, or if there's discussion on that, please come forth.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Bill. I need a second.
I'll second it, Shelley.
Thank you, Shelley. All those in favor? Or if nobody disapproves, we can just move along here by consensus. No disapprovals, Jared?
I'm not seeing any objections, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Review and approval of the September 22nd draft business meeting minutes. Anybody have corrections for that?
I'm not seeing any hands raised to make corrections.
Khalil here, move to accept.
So, thank you, Khalil.
Second.
Seconded by, I think that was Bill.
That was Bill Amaru.
Bill Amaru, thank you, Bill. There's no objection. We can move on to comments. Once again, I want to thank everybody for their attendance. And I know different members have been asking for an in-person meeting. I think Dan and Jared are thinking more about January for that. You know, there's still some issues with the Fish and Game building up in Westboro about how many people you can have in the building and whatnot. And hopefully by then, most everybody will have been boosted if you believe in the vaccination. And if not, I'm sure the state will have mandates on, you know, protocol to get into the building. That's all I have. And let's move on with the meeting. So I'm going to turn this over to Commissioner Ron Amidon.
Commissioner does not appear to be in attendance today.
Thank you, Jared. Okay, so let's move along to law enforcement.
Hi, good morning. It's Matt Bass, with the Environmental Police. So I try to be brief. Just looking back, generally for bigger cases, I kind of also look to Facebook, and it looks like the only kind of case of interest recently was in the beginning of October with a pretty significant tautog overage with a couple, 3 guys taking about 220. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me all right?
I hear you fine, Matt.
Okay. That did result in pretty large teaser of all those fish, and as well as an arrest. Also recently, our sonar search team, we were fairly involved in that search for the lost aircraft off of Chatham. We did find it, and we're able to get the state police divers on that. That kind of is still somewhat ongoing. Somewhat of concern of that latest storm that we had. I don't know how many people lost power. I certainly did. I think the last time we had a storm that big, it had a book and a movie made of it. But we're getting a lot of, you know, I think DMF's getting some reports of some catastrophic gear loss, and we're kind of concerned, going to figure out what that's going to mean come the seasonal closure for fixed gear if some of the gear is just scattered around and people can't find it. But we're kind of keeping our eye on that. Currently for hiring, we are looking to hire 1 more officer, and that's in process. We do have 4 officers just finishing up their last part of the FTO program, and so you might be seeing them out in the field probably the beginning of next year. That's all I have. Is there any questions?
Yes, good morning, Matt. It's Ray Kane.
Good morning.
So, by way of attrition and whatnot, how many officers are we going to have in the field?
Oh, in the field. You know what? Let me, I think I can get a quick count of that. I believe it's in the high 80s, but in the field might be different. So that might include managers as well. But if you give me a couple minutes, I could look that up.
Yeah, and what's the number we're trying to achieve? I mean, we keep submitting letters to the governor's office about funding, enforcement. What was the number that we came up with?
I believe decades ago, it was the way we're structured with districts and regions. It's about 130 officers would
Right.
fill all the billets that we currently have. But
Yeah, so quick math was short 50 officers.
correct.
Thank you. Any other questions for Lieutenant Bass?
I'm not seeing any hands, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Director Dan McKiernan, the floor is yours.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, good, thanks. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's commission meeting. I'll keep my comments brief. I'd like to thank the group for agreeing to postpone the meeting from 2 weeks ago because of the storm and the widespread power outages and the needs of some of the members on this group and also the staff to deal with the storm-related damage. We've learned, as Matt Bass just mentioned, about some substantial lobster trap damage and losses that many fishermen are still resolving. And that's where Commission member Suki Sawyer is today. Lobstermen are very busy trying to put their gear back in order, relocate their gear, etc. On another note, staff at DMF have been working diligently on a number of infrastructure issues. You're going to hear about some of that today, the new recreational permitting system. There will be a presentation. Also, the new commercial permitting system is being worked on. That which we issue all of our permits now is about 21 years old and in serious need of a rewrite because the software is no longer supported. And so our staff are busy, many of our staff, including Story and Anna Webb and others, are working on that. Other infrastructure issues, we are scaling down our Boston office presence. So I and many of the Boston office staff are going into that office, and when we're not busy doing normal DMF fisheries management work, we're combing through old files and purging things because we are going to be relocated to the to new location up back to the 100 Cambridge Street for us at headquarters, but with a very much reduced presence in terms of square footage. Some of our staff are going to be retreating to some of our established field stations. And so that's another thing in progress. There's also another interesting development. We are returning to the Cat Cove Marine Lab. That's a facility that was built by DMF, I believe, in the early 70s. I'm sure Kevin could clarify that for me. But we turned it over to Salem State College in the mid-1990s when we obtained the former National Marine Fisheries Service Gloucester Tech Lab on Emerson Avenue. A lot of money was invested in that Gloucester facility for our use by the governor at the time in the legislature. But we turned it over, that building over to Cat Cove. They did some work, I'm sorry, to Salem State College. They did some work on aquaculture, and as of now, about 25 years later, they're essentially pulling out. They're reducing their program in the marine area, and so we are returning to our old stomping grounds. That's where I started my career in 1985, working for the division. And at this point, Mike Armstrong is overseeing the sort of the refurbishment and the reestablishment of that facility. We hope to be able to find some state funds to invest in the building. It does need a lot of upkeep, but it's an incredible facility because it has a saltwater pond in the back that can be that is behind a dike, and with an electric gate to open and close to change the water as needed. And it was the site of the famous Paul Diodati and Richards striped bass catch and release study, where it was determined that 9% of all striped bass don't survive. That's where all that was done. And so there's been a lot of interest in that facility from outside entities to collaborate with us because that pond represents such a great controlled environment. And so it's really the future's bright for us reestablishing that. And Mike Armstrong is doing a great job. He's very excited about creating that new research location again. So we're looking forward to that. The statistics staff have just completed that CARES 2.0 program for us. You know that you're going to hear later a presentation by Kevin Creighton about us getting the money out in CARES for the pandemic-related relief for the seafood and commercial and for higher fishing industries. That really was a big task for them because they had to qualify so many individuals and also for their payment and validate them for us. They were really important. They were pivotal to that program. Now they're busy doing a lot of analyses of data in terms of fishing activity and buoy line counts, et cetera, for what you've heard about before and you're going to hear about more today, the incidental take permit that the court has ordered us to file for or apply for to the National Marine Fisheries Service for the potential take of endangered species by our commercial fisheries. And so we talk about applying for an incidental take permit. It's not as simple as filling in the blanks in a standard application. It's actually a big work order where we have to describe our fisheries in great detail, but also prescribe how we're going to reduce risk. And so a lot of the rulemaking that we brought to you over the last year have been with this in mind. That's why we were first out front with the gear marking and the weak rope, is because we needed to establish these sets of rules as part of our incidental take permit application. So you're going to hear more about this, from Bob, but I just want to explain that our statistics program is just so pivotal to anything we do in that realm. On another issue, DMF participated in a ropeless fishing workshop last month. This was funded by a National Fish and Wildlife grant with federal funds. They've asked us to help figure out ropeless fishing. What is it going to take to make it work? What are the unintended consequences, et cetera? We had about 60 folks together for a 2-day meeting last month. It was fishermen, gear developers, conservationists, and it was all facilitated by a couple of professional facilitators to understand the potential and the hurdles for these on-demand buoy systems where the gear is not visible at the surface because there's no surface system and vertical line in the water that could entangle an endangered animal. And then on another note, as we come down to the close of the calendar year, and many of our fisheries are winding down, and you're going to hear from the stats program today about how we met or didn't meet some of our quotas. We're busy planning for next year's fishery. Before the meeting started, Bill Amaru was asking some questions about the format of a meeting that we're scheduling for, I believe it's the 18th. Is that, Jared, you can help me out with that date, the fluke meeting. It's going to be a meeting, the 18th. It's going to be a meeting where we're going to display a lot of statistics that we've been able to analyze thanks to our crack statistics project, and then ask the public for ideas. How do we want to liberalize things so that we can fully utilize the quota? We're looking forward to that, and we hope that there'll be good participation in that virtual meeting. And finally, I've come to understand that we're coming on a very interesting anniversary. On July 23rd, 1962, the commission was formed by legislation, and that's the commission that you serve on today. And I thought it would be interesting maybe next summer to have one of our summer meetings around that midsummer time period to kind of recognize 60 years of the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, bring back some of the old commission members and maybe some of the old silverbacks like a Phil Coates and others who are still around. And I don't want to use the word celebrate, but kind of recognize the accomplishments of the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission. States that don't have a body like this one aren't nearly as as strong as I think we are. And it's because not only the commitment that you all bring to the table, but also the law as it was designed really creates a great opportunity for stakeholder input, checks and balances on the agency, and all of that. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll be working with Ray to put that together for next summer, and I hope everyone will attend that meeting. It'll be a normal meeting, but I think we'll keep it on the short side of the agenda, and maybe we can have some refreshments and find a place around the state where everybody feels comfortable traveling to. And then finally, next Thursday, we're holding a meeting of the Shellfish Advisory Panel, and this is a reconstituted body that was created by us on an ad hoc basis back in 2014 to improve stakeholder engagement. We were pretty successful in my view. And then at our request in the last budget cycle, the panel was codified by the legislature into state law. So it's now, I think it's Chapter 130, Section 1C. I think 1B is the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, and 1C is now called the Shellfish Advisory Panel. This panel does not have regulatory authority like you have, and any proposals for regulations would have to come to us, and I'd have to bring it to you, the MFAC. So I don't want anybody to think that in any way is your authority or involvement being compromised. But a lot of the shellfish issues are done at the local level with FDA oversight. So it's kind of a different game than most of the issues that we deal with through this commission. But it's been painfully obvious to me that there's a need for not only stakeholder education, but constituent support. And I'm hoping with a good collection of meetings, good explanations of what we do, why we do, and getting good input from these same members of this advisory panel, that we can get support for what we need to run the best shellfish program that we can. And so that meeting is scheduled for the 18th at 10 a.m. in Plymouth. That is next week. That is an in-person meeting. We're holding it at a hotel. So this is like other than the ropeless meeting we had last couple of weeks ago, last month, this will be our first time of bringing people together in kind of a horseshoe-shaped meeting, kind of like what we're going to do in the future with our commission. Hopefully, we'll be able to deal with the COVID protocols and keeping people distant and masked up if that's the local ordinance in place at the time. So Ray, those are all my comments. Sorry to go on, but I'll take any questions if folks have them.
Questions for the director? Jared?
I'm not seeing any hands, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'm going to bring up two items. As you all probably know, I sit on the Mass Fishing Partnership Board of Directors, and I've spoken to Dan about this, but just to go on record, a lot of the conversation at the last board meeting was about financial relief for lobstermen for lost gear from this epic storm, which Lieutenant Bass referred to earlier under enforcement when he spoke about it. That was number one, just so the commission knows that there's been an ask. I don't know if they've gone to DMF yet or the state looking for some kind of financial relief to replace gear. And then number two, another board member brought up, and Dan's aware of this, and I'm sure he's resolved the issue. It was brought up that at one of our commission meetings, we were going to put together a wind energy working group. And I don't recall that at a commission meeting. And that's what I said at the board meeting. But Dan's aware of the person who asked the question, and I'm sure he's resolving these two different issues. Have you heard anything about?
Yeah, Ray, I reached out to Lisa Engler. Lisa is the director of the Office of Coastal Zone Management, who is the lead entity. I work very closely with Lisa on all the developments about offshore wind, but Lisa takes the lead on that. And Lisa and I are the co-chairs of the Fisheries working groups that have been convened about twice a year over the last handful of years. And I talked to her about that, and she didn't have a recollection that we would create a separate fisheries group for the Gulf of Maine. We thought we would just be convening that same fisheries working group, but just move the meetings a little bit further north when the issues are more germane to the Gulf of Maine. Now, what's happening in the Gulf of Maine is there's interest by all three states, Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, to develop offshore wind farms, but they're going to be different than they are down south because of the water depth in the Gulf of Maine. It's too deep in the preferred areas for the monopole design with the embedded foundations in the sediment. Those that are likely to be developed in the Gulf of Maine in the future are going to be floating platforms that are anchored. And, the talk is that that's sort of the wave of the future. If you need to service the device, you can basically dismantle and bring it to shore much easier than you can, the other more fixed variety. But it means having, up to, 3 or more mooring lines on each platform, which going to go from the surface all the way down to the sediment, and an electric cable. So you're talking about a real forest of lines in the water column. So it's likely that these areas are going to become largely unfishable or far less fishable than what we are facing in southern New England. In southern New England, the wind companies agreed to a certain spacing for the placement of these in order to facilitate some level of fishing and also navigation through the wind arrays. It remains to be seen if that's possible. So it's going to be a different design up north. So there's probably going to be much different challenges. So having said all that, I don't believe it's the intent of the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs and CZM and DMF to actually create a second distinct group. I think we just rely on the input from the same group and slide the meetings, or if they're virtual, we can just do it that way, but slide the in-person meetings to the north and invite like the New Hampshire folks down. So like we've got Rhode Island and New York commercial fishermen that attend our fisheries working group meetings that are held to discuss issues about the southern New England wind areas. So I think the same thing would probably hold true. You'd probably have folks from other states crashing or attending upon, with invitations, our meetings as well. So anyways, I will reach out to the partnership and clarify that, Ray, but I haven't had a chance to do that yet.
Thank you very much, Dan, because, I never recalled the commission discussing that. So, and I know you as a fine director will reach out and speak to that person, that board of director. And has DMF heard from MLA on this revenue relief for gear?
I've had some informal conversations with Beth Cassoni, but she's still sort of taking stock of what's going on. I mean, I think what happens is after a storm like that, guys go out and they can't find the gear. So at first glance, there's a lot of gear that can't be found. I think over time, some of the gear does get relocated or brought to the surface or straightened out. If it's all balled up, it's going to, result in a lot of work. I believe in the past, in 1991, after Hurricane Bob, there was SBA loans that were made available to fishermen who lost those, gear in that hurricane. And of course, it was only 3 months later, or a little less than 3 months later, that the no-name storm came and created even more havoc. So I will be in touch with Beth on that, and I'll be talking to staff about next best steps.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Any other questions for the director? No hands?
Hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we can move along to item number 3, 2021 quota managed species updates. I presume Story's going to run this.
Yep, thank you. And I will share my screen here.
Testing, can you hear me?
Yep, Anna, we can hear you.
All right, great.
And can you see
Yes.
my screen? Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anna and I will take you through 6 species that are either still open or have closed since our previous meeting. So we'll go through these, and then we'll also show some of the running totals of ex-vessel value that Dan was talking about before the meeting. But let's start with the quota species. Anna, you want to do the first 3?
Sure.
All right, let me change the slide. There you go.
Thanks. So as most of you probably know, good morning, sorry, this is Anna. And as most of you know, most striped bass was closed as of October 2nd. Our last fishing day was October 1st. That was an interesting week because on October 1st, that was the day we were supposed to open Monday to Friday, 5 days a week, and the fishery would have closed on November 15th regardless. However, we only needed to be open 1 extra day, and that was a Friday. And we closed at around 90, I think the exact number is 99.2%. So we came very, very close to our quota. And you can see from the graph on the right that, we did have that pretty significant, pretty steady landings rate for most of the summer. And we did actually reach the quota for this fishery. Are there any questions on this one?
No,
And if
my hat's off to you folks. So, I mean, to come in at 99.7%, very good job.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks. If you'd indulge me, I want to thank the commission for liberalizing the rules this year. You may recall, I think our proposal was to go 4 days a week. The commission gave us 3. I think what was most significant in terms of accomplishing the quota was the fact that we had the back-to-back days, which meant that fishermen could fish overnight and didn't have to, abort the trip and get all that fish in by midnight, before the calendar day turned. So thank you for that. Anna, can you comment at all about the regionality of the landings compared to previous years?
Yeah, I don't have that number in front of me, but we did talk about this last year, I think, about a regional shift northward. And in 2021, that was further enhanced. So the majority of the landings, I want to say it's close to 2/3 of them were landed on the North Shore this year. Look at that number.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So this does seem to be becoming a pattern.
Thanks. And we will be reconstituting or bringing back the striped bass subcommittee for another meeting. We met last December where some of the changes for 2021 came out of, and we want to go back and talk about some of the longer term issues and revisit some of the data requests that came out of that meeting. So Jared, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we'll be scheduling that meeting in December. Does that sound right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so we'll be reaching out to the members of that subcommittee to schedule that soon.
Yeah, and to give you a heads up story, I think beach landings should be addressed. I mean, up until now, it's been 2 fish per commercial angler. And I've had a request from a number of beach fishermen that being how we've got good control over the canal, or we don't have the commercial fishery in the canal any longer, they're wondering why we can't raise that number from 2 to, they, of course, they went extremes at 10 or 15, but I'm thinking more like 5 just to see how it goes. But I think that should be on the agenda for that subcommittee meeting. So if you could please put it on the agenda, I would appreciate it.
Will do.
Any other questions on striped bass, or can we move along here?
I'm not seeing any more hands raised, Mr. Chair.
All right, so bluefish, we are relatively close to our quota at 94.5%. Oh, I forgot to mention this before because striped bass was older data anyway. But these data are current as of 11/3. Unfortunately, the data become live for the previous week on Wednesdays. Did not have time this morning to refresh everything. So I added at the bottom of this figure, as of today, we're at 94.5%. That'll be consistent through the rest of these slides. And at this time of year, we're not changing drastically. So the trends are relatively stable week to week at this point. So for bluefish, we're at 94.5%, and we've been here for a while. So we don't really expect any major changes for this fishery for the remainder of this year.
Anna, did we receive a quota transfer for this?
We did in September. We received a 50,000 pound transfer. So we've taken most of that. Any questions?
For Anna?
Like beer knock?
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had some discussions about this a few weeks ago, if I recall. With these landings, is it more indicative that what's taking place is farther north of the Cape? Where typically that wouldn't be the case. Is that still what's being observed?
I don't believe so. The majority of these landings are not from North Shore locations. I can't say for sure because we don't have area fished yet for this fishery for 2021 at all. I can do it based on where the dealers are located, and that is not necessarily the case for bluefish.
Okay, hopefully in a future presentation, you could have that detail. It'd be interesting to note.
Unfortunately,
Thank
it
you.
won't be available until next summer.
Well, that won't be timely then, but
Yeah.
okay, thank you. Thank you.
And
Yeah, just to reaffirm Anna's comment about the timeliness of this information, to remind the commission that we monitor these quotas based on dealer purchases, but the area fish location comes in from the commercial fishermen and their monthly reports. And those commercial fishermen are required to report by the 15th of the following month. A lot of that is paper that we have to key punch. And there's even there's always a proportion of the fleet that doesn't bring us those catch reports until they go to renew the permit. So that's the reason that the area fish location tends to be delayed, is that Anna likes to get those data in and in a complete form before she mines into those. I mean, we could probably give you some preliminary, but it's not going to be comprehensive.
No, understood, Dan. That works. Thank you.
Bill Amaru?
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan, I guess this question will be for you. Would the decrease in the quota significantly in 2020 and then us being able to obtain the 50,000 that we added in for this year, it made a big difference to the fishermen in this area, having that 50,000. What are the chances of our quota being brought back to something more representative of what it was before 2020?
I would turn to Nicola for an update on that. Nicola, can you comment on where the bluefish quotas are going in the future at the ASMSC
Yes.
and
Yep.
council?
Good morning, everyone. So next year, the coastwide quota is increasing 28%. The rebuilding plan will be initiated next year, and that's gonna, provided rebuilding occurs, allow for, steady increases in the quota over the 7-year rebuilding period. There's also been a revision in the state allocation formula. So our quota next year will actually be going up 37%, and it'll be about 250,000 pounds. So more than the landings this year. So, the quota next year would support this year's landings without that transfer that we got of 50,000 pounds.
Oh, that's great news. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions about bluefish?
Not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Anna? It's back to you.
Thanks. All right, so moving on to black sea bass. We are at approximately 90% at this point. However, the landings have tapered off, so we probably don't expect to hit that 100, but it is fairly close. And you can see from the graph on the right in particular that we did close it in 2020. We did get an increase in quota in 2021. So, and we tracked 2020 almost very, very closely, put it that way. So we're almost at the exact same point we were at in 2020. However, with the increase in quota, that means we're about 10% short for the year. And that's all I got. Does anyone have questions on sea bass?
I'm not sure if it should be brought up now, but we as commission members are trying to run two different fisheries, you know, a recreational charter fishery and a commercial fishery. And I would like to come to agreement for next year that after the recreational season closes, the close date, I think it's usually around the 8th or 11th of September, that we might increase the commercial landings by 100 pounds. There was a lot of sentiment for that. They were still getting paid good money. The jumbos were still around. And this year, unlike the previous 2 or 3 years, the big fish left the sound and then they returned. So I realize that 90 or 91% is a great number, but I think we could still be more advantageous to the commercial fishermen and not inflicting pain on the recreational segment. So after the recreational season closes, we can give the commercial fishermen an increase on a daily limit so we can hit our quota, because it's there to be had. And, you know, just learning from bluefin tuna, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's there to be had. Now, I expect this biomass just to keep getting larger and larger with the monopoles and whatnot. But if we could all come to agreement over the winter, so we can give the commercial guys what they deserve in the fall while they can still fish, because we brought it up many a time. It's all weather related come September, the middle of September on, and we saw it smack us right in the face this year. But anyways, that's my comment. And hopefully we'll be able to get together and resolve this issue this coming winter. Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Yeah, so Ray, I agree with you. I think we should review, maybe at our next meeting, review that which we did in season for these adjustments. And maybe we, because we've been doing those in-season adjustments every year, I think the pattern is pretty steady. I think we should re-examine our rules, much like we're going to re-examine the rules for fluke, but obviously we're close with sea bass. So I think it's worthwhile to reassess the commercial, trip limit and quota utilization strategies for black sea bass for sure. You and I have talked a lot about, you get to a certain point in the fall and no fishing days just don't make any sense. Guys want to go out there on a good weather day when they can get out, especially in this latter half of October and November. The no fishing days just don't make any sense if you have quota left over. So
we did open, Dan, we did open Fridays and Saturdays during October this year.
Yeah, but I think we might want to find a way to do that, like bake that into the regulation. Jared's been working on some of that regulatory strategy where if there's X amount of quota left, then at a date certain, certain rules could kick in because we've seen similar patterns. The fisheries perform they're fairly predictable in terms of fish movement, dropping temperatures, weather, et cetera. So I think that's a strategy we'd like to tackle, and I know Jared's anxious to do that. If we can. If we're getting really good at this and we can dispense with those 2-week comment periods, and if we know what we need to do, I think we should endeavor to do that. So thank you, Ray, for that comment. So we'll come back to you either in December or January with some proposals.
Thank you very much, Director Dan McKiernan. You phrase it so much better than me, but thank you for your comments. Any other questions on black sea bass?
We do. We have several, Mr. Chair. Mike Pearnock is next.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ray, thank you for making that point. I agree, and thank you, Dan, for following up. Yeah, the black sea bass are back. We've been out togging for a good month plus now and catching big black sea bass in shallow water that come back into, near shore. I just throw out there, I mean, we remember when we could fish, I think it was till October 10th, the for-hire fleet, and that really worked well for everybody to, help with the clientele and extend the season. And I just throw out there, if there's any opportunity to do that, that would be great. If not, the proposed approach that Ray indicated to do or open those seasons or daily bag limits or so on after that date, I'm on board with it. So thank you.
You had another hand up, Jared?
I do. Bill Amaru.
William,
Thank
you're
you.
recognized.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mike has just verbalized exactly my thoughts on that comment as well, Ray. And what I'd like to say in addition is that this is, it's two things to me. One, it's an indication of the success of management for these species over the last several decades that I'd like to hand congratulations to the managers and to the fishing industry for holding the line and bringing us back to where we are. And the other is to recognize the fact that as our climate changes, these kinds of discussions are going to become more and more paramount for us to manage the species that we're entrusted with successfully. I think there needs to be an awareness, conscious awareness, and something that we continually describe and discuss as to how to better manage fish that have not necessarily been part of the major portion of our catch in the past, and now are beginning to become very much so. So I can't think of anything specific to suggest to make that happen other than an awareness by the commission and the department that we have to continually look for ways to better manage species of fish that we not necessarily managed with that much consideration in the past. And sadly, we're going to be seeing the management of other stocks of colder water fish that we did become more in the background. At least that's the way it seems to be going. I'm sitting here right now on my dining room table with the slider wide open at 62 degrees. It's November 10th. And the weather continues to be unusually warm. And I don't think it's just an aberration. I think it's more or less a sign of the times. So anyway, congratulations to the team for the successes that we're seeing here. Every one of these slides has been optimistic. They show excellent understanding of what we can catch and how it should be caught, when. And it's just a wonderful thing to behold after a career of seeing these curves go the other way. So if you know what I mean. Very gratifying. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Bill. Any other questions on black sea bass?
There are a couple more. Khalil, you had your hand up. I don't see it up anymore. Did you have a question?
No, I'm going to wait till the very end because I couldn't unmute myself fast enough with the striped bass. So, but at the very end, I want to just ask a question about the striped bass.
Sure. And then we have one last question or comment from Nicola.
Nicola.
Yeah, I just wanted to make note, and we'll probably talk about this more next month, that our quota for next year for sea bass on the commercial side will be up close to 1 million pounds due to the reallocation strategy that looks at the regional biomass of north and south of Hudson Canyon. So that's about a 25% increase for next year on sea bass.
Yeah. So once again, that's why we have to address this over the winter. Thank you, Nicola.
That's it for comments on sea bass, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. I guess it's going back to Story now, or is Anna staying with presentations?
I'll take over now. Thanks, Anna, and she can fill in here when needed. So fluke, we talked about this a little bit already today, but we're at about 64.5%. Notable changes since the last meeting, effective September 26th, we went to 7 open fishing days. And then the trip limits increased to 2,000 pounds. I think it was the Sunday of Columbus Day weekend. So I think what you see then is a real steady trajectory here, but that was made possible by the 7 landing days or 7 fishing days, and then that increase in the trip limit. It backed off a little there. I think what you see there is the impact from the storm and less boats fishing offshore for that week period. We'll see what happens, but we're at 64.5%. And as discussed, we'll be holding an industry scoping meeting a week from tomorrow to get some input here on this fishery going forward for next year. And you do see that if you look on the right side, I think one thing to note is that winter fishery, that winter fishery is allocated by regulation 30% of the quota. At 25%, there's a trigger that reduces the trip limit. We did get right to that limit this year in the winter fishery. We didn't have to reduce the trip limit because it happened right at the date certain anyway to drop it. And then you can see the trajectory from then on might be not quite as steep as previous years, but it's still tracking above 2020 at this point. And that's what I've got for fluke.
Questions on fluke?
Bill Amaru.
William, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's good. It's good news on fluke. And the only thing I would say from talking to some of the fishermen on the Cape and around the canal area, that the increase of the possession limit came a week or two too late. That just about the time that it was announced, Dan, you remember last month, they were able to make a handful of trips, caught the larger amount for the possession limit, and then the fish started to thin out rapidly. If we've been able to increase that take a week or 10 days sooner than that, I think we would be closer to 80 to 90% of our quota being caught rather than 64%. But that's just hindsight and information for the future.
Yeah,
Bill, to that last point, I agree. And I think that to Dan's discussion on sea bass, this goes to some of our need to develop a strategy that bakes certain changes into the regulation so we don't have to be reliant on in-season adjustments where we have to schedule it between commission meetings with a 2-week comment period to enact them, where we could just say, if X percent of the quota is left on a certain date, then the trip limit is Z, and go from there. And I think that would help address some of those late season adjustments where we might miss it by a week or so, and not get that relief there soon enough. But that'll be one of the things that we need to discuss, at this upcoming meeting, as well as trip limits, seasonal allocations, and open fishing days. I think everything is probably on the table for discussion here.
Thank
Dan?
you, Jack.
yeah, just to back up your comments, Jared, this is a delicate process. You don't want to give the director, so much authority or autonomy to be like dialing this stuff up and down without commission input or public input. On the other hand, you want to be able to do it and react in a meaningful way to accommodate the utilization of the quota. So, Bill, as you mentioned, we were a week or two late. If the way the process works right now is if we leave this meeting today and come to a conclusion that we need to make a change, the way that we've written these regulations, and these are good regulations because they allow public input. Jared Silver or staff have to develop a notice about what the proposal is, that takes a couple of days. Then we run a 14-day comment period. We compile the comments, then we bring it to you. So that takes pretty much a month or close to a month by the time we're done. And so that's what we want to address. I think Jared's point, if I could sort of translate it, is I think we have good records that we can analyze, just like we did with striped bass. We have a good handle on ways we could liberalize these things based on the size of the fleet, fishing patterns, et cetera. And I think that's the best route, as opposed to going to a system where we rely more on the in-season adjustments, because as you've pointed out, sometimes those in-season adjustments aren't fast enough. And we want to get the public's input. We don't want to have one person moving these regulations in such a I won't say capricious fashion, but you don't want too many changes. It's nice for guys to be able to plan their businesses around what the rules are going to be. So let's use the data we have collected. Let's be smart. Let's just try to bake into the regulations, more liberal rules or more appropriate rules. For example, the 30% that we allocate to the winter fishery, that was established at the beginning, back when you were a young man, in the 90s, and I think this quota was established in 93, and that was the decision that was made based on the historical landings. But now we have to kind of to grips with it's kind of the decline of the inshore fleet, and try to figure out like what's preventing the inshore fleet from fishing as much as they have historically. Maybe it's time to reallocate some of that fish to boats that might be fishing in the EEZ, even during the summer months. Because there's no federal trip limit for this fish, the limits that we've established are really designed to accommodate the dayboat fleet, and that's fine. It's a good policy. That's a policy we endeavored almost 30 years ago to establish. But now I think we have to sort of take stock of what we have for fishery participation. And that's what I'm looking forward to from some of these comments, because we're hoping to get comments from the entire fleet, not just the usual summertime dayboat fleet, but it'd be about the trip limits for both the offshore fleet during the winter months as well as the inshore fleet in the summer.
And just to jump in quickly and give a little bit of additional color to Dan's comments, see at the bottom of the screen that our quota has increased almost 100% since 2018. And I think it's increased more than that since the time series low in 2017. And Nicola Clark, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're expecting a 37% increase for 2022.
That's correct, Jared. So the quota will be about 1.4 million pounds for mass, and that's due to a combination of an increase in the coastwide quota and the reallocation approach that was implemented this year for the first time.
Thank you for that insight, Nicola. Any other questions on fluke?
Mike Beardnock.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Summer flounder fluke is just another example of climatic shift in our observations and how the past few years, the spatial distribution and extent of where you find them has changed. You move into deeper water earlier, and from a recreational for-hire end, provides less availability, and in some instances, they're no longer available in state waters and they go into deeper waters. So I think we need to keep that in mind with future decisions, because it's a crystal ball of how things may change from year to year, and where the fish may be and where they may be fished for commercially or recreationally. One thing that I know happened this year, we had few, keeper size fluke. For instance, you get them in Buzzards Bay and Vineyard Sound and Nantucket Sound, and as the temperature increases, they move out. And as a result of the differential in size with the commercial being, I think it's 14 inches and the wrecks up at 17, we have quite a few at 14 and very few at 17 plus inches. If you're fortunate enough to go from Chatham to Nantucket Shoals or Nantucket, there's no lack of keeper fluke. But there's one thing that's happened this year. There's a lot less 10 plus pound fluke that are available. Now that's where I understand that the Mid-Atlantic fleet came up and took their quota in federal waters. And as a result, may have had a significant impact of what then would migrate into state waters to have the potential to land from a commercial or recreational standpoint. So I throw that out there because I don't know what the answer is to try to manage that, because I do understand how we are trying to promote our commercial fishery as well as recreational and have those fish available for us. But if they're offshore landing these fish, there are fewer that are going to show up offshore, at federal, with federal permitted vessels. There's fewer that are going to show up in our waters in order to catch them. So at the meeting, the 18th, hopefully there's some insight into the details of that, but that's been our biggest observation this year of why we've seen less fish of adequate size. But there's one thing that I wish I had. I wish I could go to Chatham and Nantucket and have that fluke available all the time. It's just not the same everywhere else. You speak to recreational anglers or the 4-hour community, they'll tell you it's just not the way it used to be. And there's fewer of them, and you got to go into deeper water to the point that they're no longer in state waters. So we need to keep that in mind, how you have a crystal ball in order to set things in place, because from year to year, it may be different. It could ultimately impact a decision that I just want us to be cognizant of that, because if we lock into something, it could be to the detriment of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any other hands, Jared?
I'm not seeing any other questions on summer flounder, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Story, you can move this
Okay.
along.
Yes, I will.
Until 10 o'clock.
All right, we'll go through these last two pretty quickly. Horseshoe crab, no real surprises here. I think as some of the inshore trawl catch rates have dropped, so is horseshoe crab landings. So it's pretty flat now. We're at about 90%, 89.5%. So we don't expect this to go up too much for the rest of the year. And then Tautog closed a week ago yesterday on November 2nd. Things tracked pretty much as they usually do. Catch rates increased as we went along. We're at 103% of the quota right now. It was a little difficult the last week leading up to that Monday closure was the nor'easter. Little hard to figure out what the landings were on either side of that. But we were pretty comfortable ending up just over 100%, just a couple thousand pounds over the 64,753 pound 2021 quota. That small overage will come off next year, but as you can see, tracked pretty normally there on the right. That's what we have for quota slides. We were going to real quickly show some value slides, but I know that Khalil had another question on striped bass.
Well, I've got a question on Tautog, and it would be addressed to Nicola. Is there talk of, I know our Tautog stock is in fine shape, Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Is there any talk of increasing the Tautog quota for Rhode Island and Massachusetts, Nicola?
I don't know, Dan, do you want to address that actually?
Yeah, Ray, there hasn't been any talk yet about that. You know that the Mass Rhode Island stock is managed under the interstate plan. And if there were going to be any changes to these common rules that we have with Rhode Island, it would have to be kind of like jointly agreed to. So we'll have to check in with Rhode Island, what they're thinking. You know, one of the, even though we have a positive stock assessment in terms of you know, being above the SSB targets, you know, a lot of that data, I don't want to call it weak, but it is MRIP based, and Tautog is one species that has maybe the largest margin of error because it's sampled at a time in the fall when there's much fewer trips and less effort expended. We expend a lot of our MRIP effort during the time of year when the striped bass catches are much more common. So I I'm pretty comfortable with the rules as drafted. I'll have to check in with Jason McNamee and see, what he's hearing. I consider this a pretty successful management program. If we did increase the commercial quota, the recreational sector might be demanding more fish. I think there's about a 90-10 split between recreational and commercial. And I don't think we're in a situation where we want to, increase the recreational harvest just because of the tenuousness of some of the MRIP data. But that's a conversation that I'll have with Jason, and I can report back to the commission.
Thank you. One more question. How's the tagging program going on the commercial side?
Oh,
I know there were issues with tagging. Some of the states were.
Yeah, great question, Ray. The state of New York had some complaints about the tags possibly causing mortality. They have we have a fall fishery when water is cooler and fish are being stored in dense amounts, but in cooler conditions. The state of New York's officials did ask for a review of the efficacy of the tagging program, I suspect, as a means to maybe amend the tagging program. I think they might be looking for a tag that is maybe easier to use and less lethal. If in fact these tags are lethal, I'm not convinced of that. But I can tell you this, that one of the dealers reported to us that a fish that he shipped to New York was flagged by the state of New York for being undersized, and it was attributable to a Massachusetts fisherman. And so it's unheard of to have that level of accountability, among the states. So I'm personally, quite supportive of maintaining the program. The tag itself, whether it's causing mortality or some kind of injury to the fish, was chosen because it was actually a tag that was designed for livestock. I think goats or some animals that you can use in the ear. And this particular tag is very difficult to remove and reuse because you'd have to really manipulate the tag and probably distort it. So there was some confidence that this program would have a lot of integrity for that reason. There is a law enforcement subcommittee, a law enforcement committee at ASMFC is looking into the tagging program, and there'll be a report that comes out in the January meeting.
Thank you, Dan. Any other questions on to TOG? If not, we'll go back to Khalil. He had an open question on striped bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we go back to the first slide, please, for striped bass? And it's a quick question.
Yep, move it right back. There you go.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm looking at the trajectory of the catch, and it seems like it was pretty steady all season long. When did we institute the 2 days to 3 day, the liberalization of the commercial fishermen? When about September?
This was the entire year, Khalil, for 2021. We went to 3 days. Last year, we did the extra day in September, I believe.
For this year. So this blue, I'm looking at the left-hand chart. This blue is for this year. Is that correct?
No, that's 2017.
No, but on the left, that is for
yes,
this year.
yes.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me lose this participant screen here. All right. So when I see so I'm looking at the right-hand line right now. So the 2021. When did we go to it still looks like a pretty steady trajectory as far as the catch is concerned. I'm curious as to what the opinion is if in fact the liberalization of the in-season change, did it really make that much of a difference, or is there an opinion that
we didn't make an in-season change this year.
What's that?
We didn't make an in-season change this year for striped bass. We only had 1 day of it because we went to the 5 day a week, but that wasn't an in-season adjustment by the commission. We baked that into the rule, right?
I'm confused. Didn't we give the commercial striped bass fishermen an extra a third day, 3 days in a row to,
All
Yeah,
season.
Set
That was
by
all
regulation
season.
At the start of the season.
Yeah, one person address, Khalil, please.
Go
okay.
ahead,
I'm-
Jared. Jared, go ahead.
Khalil, we amended the regulations prior to the start of the season, which opened the season with 3 consecutive fishing days, Monday through Wednesdays. And then on October 1, went to 5 days a week.
Understood. I understood. I apologize. I apologize. That was my error.
Began the season with 3 open fishing days, and then the last day of the season was an additional open fishing day, because I think October 1 was a Friday. So that got added as the last day. So you would not see any change in the fishing days throughout the course of that trajectory.
Understood. My apologies. I misunderstood that. Thank you. I'm all set.
Thank you, Khalil. So if you're done with your presentation, story, we can move on to items for future public hearings.
We have one more question from Mike Peardnock.
I'm sorry, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank you, Dan, for clarifying that, things should be status quo for TOG. This year, we have a nice, healthy TOG fishery out there, recreationally and for hire. It is another example of climatic shift, because as the temperatures were warmer earlier in the season, you really wouldn't see them in eastern Buzzards Bay like you would historically in the past. And as it's cooled off, they're going into the shallows, and we're seeing them mixed with black sea bass. But there's no lack of them. I suspect the MREP numbers will continue to be an issue, because there's just fewer people on the water, as noted, and fewer people that do target them. There's a dedicated population, including myself, that goes after them. But that probably is going to be ongoing. But needless to say, it's a lot better than last year, and it's very fruitful. You can even just go off the beach and throw a crab in, and you're likely going to hook up. So I just wanted to point that out. Another example of climatic shift, and the stock seems to be doing well based on our observations. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any other hands up, Jared?
No further hands. I can bring the agenda back up, Mr. Chair.
Yes, let's move along. Items for future public hearings, please. State waters groundfish management. Dan, who's got this?
Yeah, Ray, and I'm going to start the presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to Jared. So this particular proposal is loosely based on discussions that we've had with our subcommittee of this commission that met to review some of our presentation and what our objectives were. In no way has the committee necessarily endorsed this, but they guided the discussion. And so we're here today to show you what we'd like to take to public hearing for, I think in maybe a December public hearing, Jared, and then commission approval in January or February. So let me see, do we have it up on the screen? Okay, so buckle up and be patient with us, because what we're presenting to you is fairly complex. It's confusing. It's also historic. And Jared and I like to joke that in a lot of ways, this management scheme is like, a house that's been constructed one room at a time. It's where we are saddled, or where we inherited a bunch of rules that were layered over time and that are still on the books. And we just want to review some of those with you so that you can understand, what the current rules are and how we want them to be redrafted. So we just want to point out that for those who are affecting the commercial state waters groundfish, and I do want to mention that this isn't about the large production of groundfish necessarily that comes into ports. This is about management of the state waters set aside that the New England Council and the National Marine Fisheries Service puts aside for historic state waters fisheries. And these trips are not subjected to the same management plans and management regime as the larger federal system that features things like sectors and sector management and ACE, annual catch entitlements that are sometimes traded or combined and all of that. This is kind of an old-fashioned use of permits, time area closures, and trip limits. And we're facing a whole bunch of new challenges regarding protected species, but we're also trying to, in some cases, complement the existing federal management scheme where we think it's appropriate. So in essence, we have a groundfish endorsement called the GE. That's basically a permit endorsement that has been required for, I don't know, about 17 years or so. And this is a very unique permit. And when I say unique, it's because unlike the other permits, we only issue this permit to those who do not have a federal permit. What I mean by that is other permits that we might have, scup, black sea bass, fluke, et cetera. There are complementary federal permits that, so somebody might have a state permit for those species and a federal permit. In this case, the groundfish endorsement is only given to vessels or to individuals with vessels that do not hold a federal permit for multi-species groundfish. So we're truly separating out this fleet from the larger fleet. We also have a gill net endorsement for people who want to use gill nets. We have a coastal access permit, which is for mobile gear fishermen. And that was created in the early 90s when the federal government was closing much of the area around Georges and Great Salt Channel. And there was a lot of fear that the fleet was going to all head to state waters. And so then Director Coates and the commission created a new limited entry permit for the state waters fishery and basically excluding a lot of new effort that might have come in. The time area closures is another way we regulate this, and there are some that are for gear types, there are some that are for protected species, there's some for groundfish spawning, and some just to control groundfish mortality. And so you're going to see these layers of rules, and many of you have been in the fishery a long time will recognize them for what they are. And then, of course, the trip limits, we adjust those periodically because, based on input from the fishermen, but also to find a way to fully utilize this set aside. I'm not going to call it a quota because technically it's not, but what do they say? If it waddles and it quacks, it's a duck. But it's a quota, but we don't refer to it as quotas. So next slide. So, okay, so here's the overview of the permitting. Gill nets back in 1987 were fairly controversial. There was a lot of conflicts between party boats and gill netters, and there was a lot of anxiety surrounding the gear type. And so what DMF did is they created a permit for the first time. And then 5 years later, we made it a limited entry permit. And to this day, 30 years later, we don't transfer them. And the fishery is on a course to basically age out, once the current users, leave the fishery. The coastal access permit, as I mentioned before, was established in the early 90s. It was made transferable in 95 with criteria in 88 for how you would transfer it. And then, of course, the groundfish endorsement is that unique permit that we issue to those who don't have a federal permit. Vast majority of these are issued to holders of hook and line permits, commercial permits. But the truth is, most of the landings are coming from those who are using gill nets and draggers. And so that last bullet says, well, gill netters and trawlers only make up 50% of the population. They're responsible for 99% of we call the GE groundfish landings. And that makes sense because a lot of these species are flatfish, and it's, there's not a lot of successful hook and line fishing on the commercial scale for flatfish. So next slide. So now indulge me, I want to kind of go through some of these existing closures. These pink areas, we call them the Inshore Net Closures. And I mentioned earlier about the history of the Advisory Commission. When the commission was established in 1960, it was after the governor asked this newly created ad hoc commission to describe the problems in marine fisheries. And there was heavy focus on estuaries and the problems that are the benefits of estuaries and the problems of protecting estuaries and maybe some overfishing issues within the estuaries. And there were also a lot of old legislative laws about, who can fish in certain estuaries. And a lot of this was codified through some rules to capture some of those old statutes into a regulatory scheme. Over time, what Director Coates did in the 80s is establish a need to get a permit in these inshore net areas. And these are the pink areas you see on the screen. These do not include Buzzards Bay. Buzzards Bay is a special case because netting was banned there in the 1880s by the legislature when then President Grover Cleveland and his band of angling brothers petitioned the legislature to get rid of netting, which was mostly seining and I think some weir fishing. But anyway, so the division strategy was to regulate the fishing in these estuaries by requiring a permit for anybody doing it so we get a handle on that. And then over time, a lot of that was phased out, especially because of the need to protect or aggressively manage winter flounder, which I know is an issue near and dear to Bill Amory's heart. Winter flounder are particularly vulnerable, in the spawning season on the spawning grounds. And historically, the spawning grounds for winter flounder have been up inside these estuaries. So a lot of those inshore net areas have been more or less closed by the attrition resulting from DMF no longer issuing permits to do things like skiff trawling or gill netting way up inside of these estuaries. And what's left is inshore net permitting for Menhaden fishing. And so the commission, many of you know how we manage that Menhaden quota. We do it with this historic limited entry scheme for those who can target Menhaden, the inshore, up inside of the harbors. We unlike extracting winter flounder up inside of harbors, we think extracting Menhaden up inside of harbors is a fine idea because of the potential for fish kills. When they get up inside of the rivers and die, it can create an enormous public health problem. And so we have a handful of active seiners who over time have learned how to not only fish in these areas, but for the most part coexist with the other users. And so that's what we've got left here for inshore net permits. We used to issue hundreds of these. Now we issue between 10 and 20. And for the most part, most of the fish is attributable to the seiners. So go ahead, Jared. Next slide. Okay, the mobile gear closures are, this is the house built one room at a time. If you look at that pink zone in Cape Cod Bay, Jared, if you want to build the cursor on that, going north from Provincetown all the way up to the New Hampshire border, that used to represent the most of the state waters area. It was only in the 80s that we gained access to Mass Bay and Cape Cod Bay. And so the legislature enacted a series of laws controlling mobile gear fishing. And a lot of that was to protect lobster gear. And that was done on a seasonal basis because back in the day, lobstermen tended to bring their gear home by Halloween. And so most of those closures or most of those openings for the mobile gear are the seasons that the lobstermen run fishing. And so you've got a complex set of rules there that by statute or by regulation were designed to sort of protect lobster gear, if nothing else, with some fish conservation, but mostly it was gear conflict. So, and even I should add that the donut hole of Nantucket Sound, up until 1983, that wasn't even state waters, but Congress gave DMF the authority to manage that. And then Cape Cod Bay, that was given to us in the US versus Maine court case, where the outer part of Mass Bay and Cape Cod Bay's center became state waters. And so that's why we have this sort of kind of awkward set of rules where, or maybe it's not awkward, but historic rules where fishing is allowed in the center, but not tight to the beach. Because again, the reason for those old rules was gear conflict. And when it was enacted, it was all of those relevant state waters. And then state waters got much bigger. So go ahead, Jared, next slide. The Gill Net Closures are interesting. Back in the 80s, we learned about a growing tautog gill net fishery that was developing that had the potential to take striped bass as well. And so DMF and the commission in 1988 closed the waters south and west of Cape Cod to gill net fishing. I believe that is a seasonal closure of let me see.
April 1 to November 30. Or
Yeah, so basically it's
October 31.
Yeah, it basically is that time when the striped bass are present. You can kind of see the basis for that. But there's never been a significant gill net fishery down there, at least not in the span of my career. The Boston Harbor closure, that's that hatched area just east of the Boston Harbor Islands. That was a really interesting one. When I first arrived in Boston, there was this sort of a flare-up of a conflict among some newly immigrated Vietnamese fishermen and the local Boston Harbor fleet. And there was a lot of gill netting going on that at the time, it wasn't a limited entry system permit yet, but there was a fair amount of illegal activity that was detected, including targeting of lobsters and even the processing of lobsters on board some of the vessels. And so the commission and the division enacted a closure there in the outer Boston Harbor. And then finally, the lobster bycatch rules, which is the 100 count, that was established under the ASMFC interstate plan for lobsters. And it basically mirrored or it matched the 100 count that was allowed for the dragger fleet that was first enacted by regulation by DMF, and then it was later adopted at the interstate level for all non-trap fisheries. Next slide, Jared. Then you've got a layer of rules for protected species, for right whales, and also for some for harbor porpoise. But these are the right whale rules. In '97, again, we were facing court, a potential court order, but we submitted a conservation plan for right whale protection. And one of the things we did was within that hatched area, which at the time was the right whale critical habitat as defined by the federal government, we prohibited gill netting in the state waters portion of that from January through May 15th. There wasn't much gill netting going on there anyway. It wasn't a substantial, didn't have a substantial impact on the fleet, but that's what we did to prevent future entanglements if there was going to be any. It was challenging. And then in two steps, you can see that purple area. We expanded that closure because if someone drops a gill net there, and as it turns out, right whales did start to become more prevalent on the western side of the bay. So we added that little extra piece in the early 2000s, and then in 2021 we added that peach area to get a more rational management approach, because we were prohibiting lobster gear. It made little sense to allow gill net gear to go in there, especially given the oversight that the courts have had over us over the last couple of years. Go ahead, Jared. And then, of course, we've got the gill net closures for harbor porpoise protection. What's interesting about that is it was a state rule, periodically, but we couldn't keep up with the changes in the rules. So we basically dropped them from our state CMR because we've been advised by NOAA attorneys that under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, NOAA's rules apply to all commercial fishing, even whether the permit holder has a state or a federal permit. So when the NOAA rule or the NIMS rules in that yellow area apply to the fleet, it doesn't matter if it's a state permit holder or federal. So because we couldn't keep up with the rule changes, every time the NOAA would adjust those in season and space, we'd have to go to rulemaking, and we weren't getting a lot of cooperation from the folks in the high levels of the administration that oversee us, our rulemaking process. We decided it was best to drop those rules, but that's just another layer of rules that affects these guys. So go ahead, Jared. Next slide. In the late 80s, David Pierce, as a young upstart biologist, came up with an idea to protect winter flounder spawning closure, not only in the inshore net areas, which we'd already established, but to do it out to about a mile from shore, by using buoy to buoy point coordinates. And that was the February 1st through April 30th. And then we extended that to include the month of May. And so that was very specific to any gear, mostly the draggers and the gill netters, to protect what was at the time felt to be one of our more valuable inshore fisheries, which was winter flounder, which has not recovered to the level that we've seen historically. But that's the purpose of that rule. That was a most recent one by DMF and the commission, and it was based on trawl survey information. Where are we seeing pre-spawning fish, and where were we seeing spent fish? And so that's why those lines were drawn. Next slide. And then the federal government back in the early 2000s was coming up with, or actually late 90s, early 2000s was coming up with rolling closures. And so, we've tried to complement those closures in most cases, some cases not, and that's what we're going to get into shortly, with these closures that weren't necessarily laid out to address spawning, and mostly it's codfish, but this is where the effort was. And so the federal government was constraining the effort in these areas. And so we adopted complementary measures. And this was all pre-sector, pre-quotas in the federal groundfish plan. And again, this is another remnant rule from time gone by. And so what has happened over the last 15 years is we've operated two, and you've probably heard the expression IBS, Industry-Based Surveys, and these were state-funded surveys where DMF contracted trawlers to conduct basically a trawl survey with a net designed for this purpose. And there were two iterations of this. One was, I think, around 2005, and another was about 10 years later. We repeated it. The first round, it was Bill Hoffman and his team. Second round, similar, he did it again. And I believe that Bycatch has done a lot of work toward his dissertation with much of the results that include great analyses and reveals about spawning condition and spawning times and places. And there's also been a lot of genetic work that has described these different spawning aggregations, or these separate sort of stocks that seasonally spawn in discrete times. They're separate populations, but you only know that from some of the work that they've been doing recently. So anyway, I'm not sure we want to, I don't want to go into every detail here, but also finally we have the groundfish trip limits. These have been established historically. These are the limits that we've tweaked, dialed up, dialed down over time to try to reach the soft quotas, for lack of a better term. You'll notice the Southern New England cod is 1,000 pounds. I don't think there's any Southern New England codfish that's actually being taken in state waters. So I'd be very surprised if there is. And for gray sole, you have 750 pounds. That's primarily a fish found in the offshore waters. There's not that level of abundance, but our trip limits are really addressing the big three of yellowtail, winter flounder, and Gulf of Maine cod. And we try to monitor those landings very carefully during the season through dealer reporting. And then historically, we've been making decisions about whether to keep the month of April open. It was this commission, I think, that approved that proposal that David Pierce had brought forward as a means to maximize the flexibility and the utilization of those quotas. So there's almost no fishing going on December through February. And so that there's enough of a lag so that Anna and her team can be very busy adding up all these catches to determine if we are close to those targets or not. And historically, if we are not for certain species, then we've lifted the closure as the regulations prescribe. So again, these are set asides for all states, but Massachusetts is the predominant state for an in-state groundfish fishery. Most other states don't have in-state groundfish fisheries of any consequence. So even though, it's not a Massachusetts quota per se, even though it's almost predominantly Massachusetts landings. Jerry, next slide.
Oh, sorry, Dan, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead. I think is this slide 11? No.
Yeah, this is the last slide of the background. So we're going to move transition.
Yes.
Getting into.
So I've been asked to, I'm going to call for a 10-minute break, biological break here. And we're running behind time on our agenda. So questions pertaining to Dan's presentation, please keep them concise and you're going to get one bite at the apple. We're falling way behind on time.
Yeah. Ray, I would ask that the commission maybe focus more on what we're proposing. We can share this with everybody, but we're really talking about the future amendments, and that's what Jared's going to focus on next in this presentation, is what we're proposing.
We'll come back to that. 10-minute break.
You got it. At what time then? It's
10:42.
all right, we got it. Thanks, Ray.
And we are reconvening our commission meeting. Jared, what's on? Are you going to give a presentation now after Dan's presentation?
So we're ready to begin. We'll transition from this background information to the presentation on public hearing proposals affecting the state water groundfish fishery. And I've asked that Melanie and Mike Armstrong jump in and help me if they think I missed anything in going through this. So we met with the Commission Subcommittee for State Waters Groundfish on September 17th. We discussed some of the challenges facing the fishery regarding rebuilding cod, right whales, rebuilding cod and right whales, and discuss some potential changes we can make to management should we have to take actions to further conservation actions on those issues, to provide opportunities to take ground fish at times and in places where spawning cod and right whales were not of substantial concern. Based on those conversations, again, to reiterate what Dan said, these proposals were not endorsed by the subcommittee, but were informed by the subcommittee. So based on the conversations with the subcommittee, Dan has come out with 5 proposals to take to public hearing this winter to address the state waters groundfish fishery. This includes expanding the January 1 through May 15th Gill Net closure from Cape Cod Bay to all state waters, to adopt an April 16th through April 30th commercial groundfish closure to protect spawning cod from Plymouth to the Massachusetts, New Hampshire maritime border, rescinding the April 1 through April 30th conditional groundfish closure in Massachusetts Bay, should the Gill Net closure and April cod spawning closure be adopted, increase trip limits for Gulf Made cod from 200 pounds to 300 pounds, and yellowtail flounder from 250 pounds to 350 pounds, rescinding the Boston Harbor Gill Net closure that runs from May 15th to October 31, which was the closure that Dan discussed, being to address the gear conflict on with lobsters back in the 80s. So I'm going to go through each of these items, and at the end, I think for the sake of time and brevity, I will we'll field questions at the end of the proposal just to let me get through the slides. So the first proposal is to expand the January 1 through May 15th Gill Net closure, which currently occurs in that purple area in Cape Cod Bay from Situate south to all of state waters. The rationale is that it expands the Gill Net closure into areas and at times where right whales are seasonally known to be. We can see in April and in May that there are observations of right whales both off Boston Harbor and east of Cape Cod in state waters that are outside where this Gill Net closure is. The same goes for May. This primarily will affect Massachusetts Bay, as that's the area where there is a Gill Net fishery during April and May. That by expanding to state waters, it will include east of Cape Cod and those waters south and west of Cape Cod, but there is no groundfish, no Gill Net fishing activity reported in these areas in recent years, both due to the existing regulations, availability of fish. So this predominantly will affect the Gill Net fishery in Cape Cod Bay. I think we anticipate that there are about 6 gill netters who may be affected by this proposal. Like the trap gear proposal, we will, or like the trap gear closure rather, we will move to rescind this closure when whales depart or observed departing from state waters, or expand that or extend that closure beyond May 15th should they remain. I think last year the trap gear closure was lifted on May 13th. We'll have that same authority for this Gill Net closure. So that's the first proposal. The second proposal is to adopt an April 15th or April 30th groundfish closure. This groundfish closure would run from Plymouth to the Massachusetts, New Hampshire border west of 7030. It would be designed to protect spawning cod. It would prohibit the use of commercial groundfish fishing in the area, and this would be inclusive of certain gears capable of catching groundfish, such as trawls and gill nets. It would not apply to other mobile gears like sea scallop dredges. So the rationale for this is there is a federal Mass Bay spring spawning area, which is that pink square that you see on the map to the left. And that went into effect, I believe, in 2019 and runs from April 15th to April 30th. So that would complement that. It also addresses our evolving knowledge of spring cod spawning activity. Dan mentioned the 2 industry-based surveys. During IBS 1, we observed a lot of spawning occurring in May. It's notable that we did not conduct a survey from June to October, so we have no data for that period. But we observed the bulk of spawning activity occurring during May, with March and April contributing to a lesser extent. In the most recent IBS survey, we have observed both the spring spawning activity was less robust during the second IBS period than during the first IBS period, but April was a larger contributing month to when spawning occurs. So there is some sense, if we are working to rebuild the Gulf of Maine cod stock, to include April in our spawning protections. By expanding our closure north to the Massachusetts, New Hampshire maritime border rather than 4230 like the federal closure is, we have the benefit of protecting previously observed spawning cod aggregation. So back during IBS 1, we observed spawning cod aggregations on the state federal waters line off Cape Ann. So if the population is to rebuild to a period when it's to a size when it was more robust, the use of those areas for spawning activity may come back. So that would potentially protect them moving forward. The next proposal on here is, should the Gill Net and spawning cod proposals move forward, we'd also like to rescind this additional April closure. As you know, every winter we tally up the groundfish landings, and then we determine if we need to have an April 1 through April 30th groundfish closure in this area. It was adopted back in 2019 as a fail-safe to prevent the state waters groundfish fishery from exceeding its state water set aside and potentially the federal ACLs that may trigger accountability measures. Since we've implemented this, we've lifted the closure each of the last 3 years. If we were to adopt the Gill Net closure and the spawning closure, then this conditional closure would be mostly redundant, and it lessens the need for that fail-safe, as we'd expect that that we would see continued attrition in this fishery that may lead to underutilization. So with these additional closures, we don't think that the overutilization of the set-asides and ACLs would necessitate having this remain on the books. We'd also move to make several adjustments to our state waters groundfish management program to provide access to groundfish stocks at times and places where spawning cod and right whales are not of concern or not of as substantial concern. So this would be increasing the Gulf of Maine cod trip limit from 200 pounds to 300 pounds, increasing the yellowtail flounder trip limit from 250 pounds to 350 pounds, and eliminating the outer Boston Harbor Gill Net closure. Based on our reading of the tea leaves for state water set-asides, we do not think that these trip limit increases are going to result in a large-scale increase in landings, where we would be concerned about running over the state water set-asides and potentially overrunning ACLs. So rather, they'd allow for the additional retention of fish during some trips, and perhaps reduce some regulatory discarding that may be occurring on some trips where the full trip limit is being retained. And the rescinding of the Boston Harbor Gill Net closure that was enacted in the 80s due to conflict among lobster trap fishermen and emerging gill net lobster fishery. At this time, most of our gill net fishermen are also lobster trap fishermen. There's not going to be an emerging lobster gill net fishery given the 100 lobster limit on the use of gill nets and the ability for these fishermen to fish trap gear as well, which is more efficient than gill net gear in the catching of lobster. So that may open up some area off Boston Harbor that may be productive for winter flounder during the May 15th through October 31 period. So that summarizes our proposals. There's a lot of details in the memo that I glossed over. The memo is fairly extensive. It's about 15 pages and gets into a lot of the nitty gritty on this. So if you have specific questions or comments, I can manage that now. We're not looking for a vote on this today. This is just a discussion about taking this to public hearing. And I'd anticipate we'd have this public hearing maybe before the holidays, but more likely immediately following the holidays, and then come back to you folks at our January meeting with a final recommendation. So that's what I have for these proposals, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Immediate questions for Jared? Any hands, Jared?
I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay,
You
so,
just Lou's mic come on, so I was thinking Lou might have a question or comment.
Lou Williams.
Yeah.
Questions or comments?
Yeah, hey, yes.
Lou, you're breaking up.
Yeah, hang on. Can you hear me now, Jared?
I've got you, Lou.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I'm gonna say on this is that 2 weeks in April, give you a history what that's about. That's a sector rule. The sector boats have to go by. And we got some few boats in Gloucester that get all upset because there's a couple draggers that can fish in the half hour for those 2 weeks when they can't fish right outside the half hour. But they just steam down the southern below the double dumps outside of state waters and they go fishing every day. You close those 2 weeks to the state boats, a couple of boats that are left going. They got no place to go. The first 2 weeks of April, there's really no fish there. It's all skates. So that's when they get the season started. So that closes, you close that for 2 weeks, they got no place to go. And then we have a May closure on top of that, the sector boats are fishing outside the half hour for the month of May, but we're closed for a month. So, you know, the whole thing doesn't even make any sense to me. Those boats, you can look up the numbers. They don't catch enough codfish to eat those 2 weeks in April. I really think you shouldn't really go through with this. I think it just hurts them. I mean, the boats that were complaining were going out of steam another 45 minutes to the southern and load up on haddock every day. You do this to the state boats for 2 weeks in April, they'll be catching haddock. They'll catch nothing. They'll be tied to the dock. Now, as far as the gill netters go, the first 2 weeks of May down in that little tiny area that's open right now, that's going to be the only time they really catch too much fish. You can look it up. The last 2 weeks, it gets real slow in there. They're going to wait for the area north to open up. So now you're going to give them 2 weeks in May where it stinks. If you're going to do this, and I understand with the right whales, when May 15th comes and when the right whale closure is lifted, just open it up to the 4230 to the like 3 boats that are left. I mean, it's just a sin to say, oh, you can go back down there where there's no fish, you know? So, you know, that's my point. That's the history behind that 2 week closure. And it's a big difference. The boats that are complaining get to go fishing, but the boats in the state waters that fish in the half hour tow there in April, they'll be tied to the dock, and then they'll be tied to the dock for the month of May. Well, those complainants are right outside of half hour federal waters fishing. So I don't think any of this makes sense. You know, I just think, you know, we're and now, like I said, that's a sector rule. So now the ground fish is being going by sector rules, going by common pool rules. I mean, you know, I mean, I'm done. I don't, you know, it doesn't matter to me now. I'm done. I've had enough of it. But there's like 3 gill netters left, a couple of draggers, and this is just going to make it that much harder on them. And I really think that 2 weeks in April to appease a few guys that are still fishing, to tie other guys to the dock, I don't think is right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, Ray, I had a quick question for you because I'm out hauling gear.
Yeah,
Yeah. When we go to in-person meetings, I was just signing on this morning, and did you say that to go in the building you have to be vaccinated?
I'm not sure Jared will inform us of that when we can start having in-person meetings.
Okay, I just thought you said that you had to be vaccinated.
No,
I kinda caught it.
I don't bring vaccination. I just say whatever state protocol is.
Right. I'm just, yeah, that's okay. I just want to know, because if that's the case, I'm out, so I just want to let the commission know that and let Dan know that in case they got to get somebody else. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other hands, Jared?
Bill Amaru.
William, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't even know where to begin with this, to tell you the truth. It's tremendous amount of information. I think the history lesson was great. It's a good topic for a PhD. And it would be worthwhile for someone to get one in the history of Massachusetts state rules and regulations on commercial fishing. But I guess the only thing I want to say, and I know this isn't going to fit in anywhere, that we can be talking about our groundfish resources in state waters without talking about the evolving predator-prey relationships between the expanding marine mammal population, seals, and the cormorant, the habits of cormorants feeding in state waters. Because to me, they're so interrelated to a healthy resource in our state waters is to be almost inconceivable that we could be talking about a healthy resource and the ability of commercial fishermen to go after them without including these other impacts. And I just was wondering if there's any way, knowing the federal rules and regulations concerning what we can and can't do to manage these things, that somehow the state could make a statement in its declarations of purpose, stating that without the ability to manage the entire ecosystem, we simply can't cherry pick where we want to have impacts and leave the rest of it alone. It just doesn't make sense to me. So just because I know eventually if we're ever going to have a rebuilt resource, we have to include management of these things. We have to start talking about the way we get to that point. And obviously it's going to have to be legislative, but if we don't ask our legislators to educate themselves on the topic, how can we ever expect someone to go forward and design a bill that it addresses the proper balance between marine mammals, birds, and the other environment, the other animals in the environment? So somehow a statement made that just declares that we feel handicapped to do a proper job without being able to manage the other species along with the commercial fish and recreational fish that we're talking about doesn't make sense. Otherwise, in lieu of what Lou just said, as I'm not familiar with what happens up on the North Shore that he so well described, I would say that everything else in there looks good to me. I'd love to think that we could increase possession for yellowtail and for cod, the small amount that it's designed to do. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it. I know the Georgia's situation for yellowtail flounder is not good. We had a seminar last week that Gary held, and in it, the description of the conditions on Georgia's for yellowtail flounders are so bleak as to be almost unbelievable. A quota of 300 metric tons expected for 2022. When I was on the Fisheries Councils back in the 1990s, there was a 10,000 metric ton allocation quota for yellowtail flounder on Georgia's. I don't know how much better the Cape Cod stock is doing and the mass water stock is, but boy, if it's anything like what's going out there, there won't be a boat that'll ever land 100 pounds, let alone 300. But if that ever happens, I'd love to see it. Well, those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, William. Jared, hands.
Mike Bearden.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just like to respond to Bill, and I agree with Bill. I mean, I look at the top three: gray seals, cormorants, spiny dogfish, and what they do to the detriment of our fishery. I've been emerged in the New England Fishery Management Council and on I'm on the Ecosystem-Based Fishery Management Committee. Unfortunately, the Magnuson-Stevenson's Act does not take into consideration EBFM. We have some single species management and multi-species management examples. We hope at some point in trying to move in that direction to do that, but it probably is going to take congressional action to make that happen. And there's presently a draft rule before the feds to address that. One thing that I'm trying to work, and just some food for thought, we possibly could follow up with this, is that I've thrown out there the impact to our seafood and the fact that the gray seals, they defecate, and unfortunately our cod eat that material, and our cod have cod worms. We've observed that now we see them in haddock, and now we see them in black sea bass, and they correspond to locations where there's gray seals, and it's having a detrimental impact on our fish commercially as well as recreationally. Maybe there's some road we can go on down to address that. I understand from discussions with commercial fishermen, there's other species where they're seeing the same, and maybe there's an approach that it could be addressed that way. But I'd like to follow up with this offline to discuss it further with Bill and Dan and others, how we could move forward to try to address it with the regulations the way they presently are set, which is difficult, if at all anything, to do anything about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any other hands, Jared?
I'm not seeing any other hand, Chair.
So this will be going out to public hearings sometime in December, January. And I'm sure we can all review this packet between now and then.
Yeah, there'll be an extensive memo too that follows up on this following the public hearing and public comment that responds to some of those items that may be discussed and comments heard from as well. So.
All right, thank you, Jared. We'll move along to discussion items. State and federal protected species management updates. Who's got this?
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Chair. This is Bob Glenn speaking. Thank you very much. I have this section. I have a few brief slides that I will pull up on the screen.
All right, Bob,
Jared,
you're the host now, so you should have access to sharing screen.
thank you very much, Jared. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. Just quickly, I have four brief slides to update you on ongoing issues related to protected species. The first of which is that if you remember a former commission meeting, I let everyone know about that in August of 2021, National Marine Fisheries Service proposed a new fishery in the 2022 draft list of fisheries that was published in the Federal Register. This fishery is called the Mass Mixed Species Pot and Trap Fishery. And what this does is it consolidates our three separate fisheries, our lobster pot fishery, our whelk pot fishery, and our fish pot fishery into one fishery for the purposes of the list of fisheries, which is a component of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Through this process, National Marine Fisheries Service also categorizes each fishery relative to its level of risk. Currently, all three of those fisheries lie separately in larger regional fisheries like the Northeast Lobster Trap Fishery, which is categorized as high risk, a Category 3. In the proposed rule that NIMS put forward, they're proposing the new fishery, which is the Mass Mixed Species Pot Trap Fishery, as a Category 2, which is a lower tier of risk. And this is what I had updated you on previously. The good news is that this sets us up very well for a successful ITP application. part of the requirements for any of these fisheries is that the gear in each fishery is distinguishable from all other pot trap gear, meaning that if you pick up a buoy line from a Massachusetts pot of whatever the target species is, that is distinguishable from either federal waters and or adjacent states. The reason for that is as part of an incidental take permit is you have to monitor the number of takes that you have, and they do so, part of that is by the known entanglement rates. And as such, if you remember back in June, this commission approved unique lobster pot gear marking regulations that made the Mass lobster fishery uniquely distinct from all others. Recently, speaking with National Marine Fisheries Service, I found out that they plan to finalize the proposed, finalize the 2022 list of fisheries in early December. They're currently in the process of reviewing public comment made on that. And one of the issues that they brought up was that currently DMF has not implemented a unique gear marking scheme for the whelk pot and fish pot fisheries, which would now be part of the mixed trap pot fishery. And since all those fisheries will be listed as one, it'll be necessary for us to have similar gear or unique gear marking components for that would be the same for the lobster, whelk, and fish pot fishery. And so to address this, our plan is in January to go to public hearing. We will need to promulgate new regulations to have the state lobster trap gear marking rules that were approved last June also apply to the whelk and fish pot fisheries, so that we can obtain this separate fishery listing. And so we're anticipating that the public hearing for this will occur this coming winter in early 2022, with the hopes of getting with the need to get it in place prior to the onset of both the whelk and fish pot fishery this coming year. Last week or the week before, we had a meeting of the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team, and the main topic of that was an update of the 2020 right whale population update. I regret to inform you that the news was not particularly good. The 2020 estimate of right whales is down now to 336. That's from the 2019 estimate was at around 360. In 2019, there was an estimated mortality of 33 individuals. 12 of these were observed serious injury and mortalities. An additional 21 of those mortalities are attributed to a category called cryptic mortality, which are those animals that are assumed dead after not showing up in the catalog for 5 years or more. Another portion, not a highlight, but another point that they pointed out in their information was that currently there's only roughly 68 reproductive females that have a 50% or greater likelihood of being alive, and so the reproductive capacity of the stock is currently very limited. With this updated population estimate, NIPS now projects that a 92% reduction in the risk of serious injury and mortality will be necessary in all fixed trap fisheries to achieve the goal of potential biological removal, which is a mortality level of 0.7 right whales per year. Currently, NIMS is reevaluating if additional measures under the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Plan will be required in the short term. And so if you remember, over the last several years that they've been working in the first phase of their implementation with the lobster fishery to reduce risk by 60 to 80%. That target now is 92%. And then moving forward in phase 2, which we're currently working on for other fixed gear fisheries like Gill Net and other pot fisheries, that their goal will also be a 92%. The one good thing from the Massachusetts fishery perspective is that the measures that this commission and DMF has put into place so far at this point is estimated by the NIMS decision support tool to have already achieved about a 91 to 93% reduction in serious injury and mortality based on what we've already done. So we're in pretty good shape and well ahead of the curve relative to what is going to be asked of other states and jurisdictions moving forward. In anticipation for the upcoming closure this coming winter, we know that that in all years there's some portion of gear is lost and or abandoned, typically lost. This year, it may be worse than as expected because of the large nor'easter that we had. And so we're in anticipation of that. We're currently planning on how to deal with abandoned gear and how to remove that gear from the closed area. We're kind of looking at this at both kind of the short-term perspective and also the long-term. The short-term being that the need to immediately redress getting those buoy lines out of the water during the right whale season. The long-term is doing so in a kind of a long-term self-sustaining program. One of the current issues, though, is that we would need a statutory change on gear possession rules to allow for efficient and timely retrieval of gear. Right now, only the owner or law enforcement technically can handle that gear. And so Dan and myself and others are working on kind of investigating some of what the strategies and also the statutory authorities that other states use to address this issue. In the short term for this coming season, DMF has some funding left over from that was for protected species that came from the governor's office. And our plan for this year is to work with environmental law enforcement and DMF, and as well as to contract some commercial lobster vessels to quickly and efficiently pay them to go out and remove gear. We're currently working on that internally and with ELE to try to figure out the best mechanisms to do that and how we'll execute that. Long-term, DMF is applying for a NOAA marine debris grant to initiate a self-sustaining program. And we've looked to successful models that are being used in states like California, Oregon, and Washington, where they have similar protected species closures and a need to remove gear. And they have some pretty innovative programs. And so along those lines, we're in the process of organizing a meeting with key Mass state legislators, as well as staff from fisheries agencies from the West Coast to learn more. And as we learn more and start to develop the seeds of some programs, we'll continue to share this information with the commission for additional feedback. And then lastly, as Dan indicated at the beginning of the meeting today, on October 13th and 14th, DMF hosted a ropeless fishing workshop. It was very well attended. We really appreciate, especially the large number of fishermen attending, which, of course, it was a beautiful October afternoon when the sea states were actually really nice. And so the fact that we had 20 fishermen show up was a real sacrifice on their part and very much appreciated because their input is critical. We also had representatives from 3 fishing organizations, 2 law enforcement agencies, and then a mix of state and federal regulators, gear engineers and developers, and also a healthy dose of conservation organizations take part. It was a great 2-day workshop, and the major takeaways from this was that kind of 4 major takeaways right now is that one of them being is that much more work is still needed to deal with how, what the potential for and how to resolve gear conflict moving forward is between both fixed gear fisheries and also fixed gear and then mobile gear fisheries. There's several unanswered questions, such as how close can these fisheries operate to each other? How will each of the fisheries know where their gear is, etc. And so at this point, one of the major takeaways was that there's still much to be learned, and it's certainly not developed to a point where it's broadly scalable to to the fishery. And speaking of scalability, another real highlight was that there's a lot of concern as how ropeless fishing would impact small business owner operators. As you know, the lobster fishery by design is a small owner operator fisherman, small family run businesses. And there's a lot of concern that the implementation of ropeless fishing just wouldn't really be scalable to them, given the large capital investment that would be required, and that there's concern that this would kind of change the dynamics and kind of the face of the industry, and certainly that was a major theme. There was also some major concerns about the about equity in the experimental fisheries permit or letter of authorization process. So currently, according with the new NIMS proposed rules, their closures are not closures to fishing; they're closures to the use of persistent buoy lines. And so, what NIMS is doing with that change in definition is that they're kind of opening the door for ropeless fishing to occur. That said, any ropeless fishing still in federal waters still requires an experimental fisheries permit, and in state waters would require a letter of authorization. And so there's real concern, especially among industry participants, about what would be done to ensure equity in who gets experimental fisheries permits, LOAs, how they would be allocated, and also how would, say right now, most of the gear that's being used to test ropeless fishing is owned by either National Marine Fisheries or NGOs, and then lent out through what's called the gear cache. And but there's not enough gear to go around for everyone who's potentially interested, and so there's concern about how those decisions are made, who gets access to those resources. And then the final main point was there was concern that there is still a fair amount of uncertainty in what the process is to obtain EFP letter of authorization. The federal government, nor has state agencies, really mapped out the process on how to obtain this and what the criteria are. And there was concern among industry members that there needs to be kind of more of a consolidated effort by various agencies to make the process more reasonable and streamlined for fishing industry members. And so that's the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Questions for Bob Glenn?
I'm not seeing any hands, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'm sure if somebody comes up with a question, they can get in touch with Bob at the New Bedford EMF office, right, Bob?
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission updates. Nicola?
Jared's going to bring up a presentation, and it starts with lobster. So I think Dan will cover the first two slides here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, we're looking at two actions taken by the Lobster Board that will be coming up in the next quarter. The first has to do with what's being called Gulf of Maine, Georges Bank Resiliency. It's an attempt to create a management strategy in response to a decline in the stock. The decline has begun. We don't know how far it's going to go. It originates in smaller numbers of young of the year lobsters surviving. Bob's group, the Tracy Pugh's group that does a lot of the not only the ventless trap, but also the young of the year suction sampling. They know that there's been weaker year classes over the last decade that are going to be manifested in lower landings. And so this plan would allow the management board to instantly adopt some predetermined or preconceived trigger for management once the trigger hits a lower point. And so that what's being debated there is what the index should be, what the level of the index decline should be, and what the actions should be. And how it will affect Massachusetts is there is talk about the need for more uniform measures within a lobster management area. For example, our Outer Cape state waters fishermen have more liberal standards than our Outer Cape federal permit holders. And for a lot of reasons, folks want to see that amended, but also other measures that might make some rules more uniform among the LMAs. I don't want to get into that in too much detail yet because it's still going to be argued over a series of meetings. The second one has to do with electronic tracking on the federal lobster fleet. Folks who are in the groundfish fishery now or the scallop fishery know that there's already vessel monitoring systems required for those fisheries, which actually gives the fleets, but also the managers, some really good handle on the footprint of those fisheries. And that's really missing in the case of the lobster fishery. And I can tell you in my meetings with the folks internally about offshore wind development, one of the big regrets is that as we try to identify areas that would minimize the impact to the commercial fishing fleets, the lobster fishery is so poorly documented because of the lack of some kind of a vessel tracker to know where the vessels fish, where's the gear being set. Currently, the data is kind of a hodgepodge of mostly statistical area information, which just isn't precise enough to effectively, map out some squares of where you might put a bunch of wind turbines. On top of that, you've got ongoing efforts at the federal level to enhance offshore aquaculture, and it would be ideal to know in advance where the lobster fleet's footprint is, so that an offshore aquaculture proposal doesn't have the negative impacts on the lobster fleet. So those are the two major items. There's going to be a special virtual board meeting on December 6th for that electronic tracking. Story Reed and his staff, as well as folks from Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island, have been working on these trackers. They're cellular phone based. They're not nearly as expensive as VMS. They wouldn't be used in real time. They would just be, if the boat goes out of cell phone range, the data keeps getting collected. When the boat gets into cell phone range, it gets uploaded. It wouldn't be like a VMS where the government could look at a screen and know exactly where they are. It's more after the fact, but it would be really useful for marine spatial planning and our attempts to protect the fishing fleet from being displaced by these offshore development projects. So I'll send it back to Nicola and Mike at this point. Oh, I see another one. This is the TATOG assessments. We talked about this earlier, Ray. Good news is the assessments come back. It's very good news for Long Island Sound, where the stocks were in quite poor shape. That's probably the best news of all, is that the Long Island stock seems to have rebounded. For us, there wasn't overfishing in the Mass Rhode Island stock, but it's a little piece of good news. So now I'll let Nicola take it over from there. Yeah, and I think Mike might want to mention about striped bass. I'm not sure how much interest there is in striped bass. I'm kidding. It's probably the most high-profile species that ASMFC manages, and so there's a lot at stake for the commission. So, Mike, do you want to speak to what's going on?
Sure. So as you probably all know, we're in the middle of developing Amendment 7. And so the PDT worked for several months crafting it, and it was presented to the board the last meeting, and we went through it, made some changes, revisions, additions, subtractions, and we sent it back to the PDT to develop a few things. But that doesn't throw the schedule off, because we could probably implement something next year. Many states, because of their legislative process, can't do it that fast. So the implementation date is 2023. So although we kicked it down the can down the road until next meeting, we'll still be able to do it. So in theory, we will approve it at the winter meeting to go to public hearing. So we'll be going to public hearing late winter, early spring, and hopefully get it done in the next couple of ASMFC meetings after that. Very briefly, because I know we're behind, and guys can call or email me if you have any questions. We looked at management triggers, and they were a little confusing. So we're trying to clean them up. We got rid of a few of them that didn't make all that much sense. We added some to do running means so that we're not chasing our tail around, chasing F and SSB. Under the measures to protect the 2015 year class, we threw out the proposal to have a moratorium. We just don't feel it's nowhere close to what it was in the 80s. So we took out the moratorium. And probably most importantly, we added a maximum size and a slot limit option for Chesapeake Bay, because initially in this amendment, the Chesapeake Bay was not affected at all. And people felt that they should have some skin in the game. And, they're dealing with much different size fish, much smaller, but they still need some protection to get them through the bay and out onto the coast. So that's probably a good addition. Looking at the release mortality measures to try and release it, we removed all the wave 4 closures that were designated 2-week closures and applied either coastwide, regionally, or in a state. And it was all in wave 4, primarily in July and August. And people just didn't feel that was something that could be done at the height of tourist season to close down most important wreck fishery we have without a quantifiable effect wasn't really palatable. But we left in an option where we could pick a wave for a month to have a 2-week closure if that's what we decide to do. And we also got rid of the proposals to prohibit treble hooks and require barbless hooks and prohibit trolling with wires. Not that those maybe aren't good things for the future, but we have absolutely no data of what the effect would be. And particularly the trolling one, that's just, targeting this very specific fishery that no one can really come up with the reason why that would be important to get rid of that. So we took those out of the document. For conservation equivalency, we removed the option for outright prohibition. No one wants to do that, but the options that remain have some very strict options for when you can use CE. Primarily, it can't be overfished or overfished can't be occurring. You have to have a certain PSE on the data to use it. So there's a bunch of options that really tighten up the CE, and I think it's a really good way we're heading there. And then there was a proposal that passed to adopt an F rebuild that would rebuild in 10 years, but under an assumption of low recruitment. And that's really important because we may be in a period of low recruitment, which it'll be kind of tragic if it is. And it's all environmentally induced. The last 5-year classes were 2, a little above average, were some of the biggest clunkers we've ever seen. So we just weathered what we're doing. The downturn we're seeing now is because poor recruitment for 5 years, several years ago, and now it's happening again. So it will be a challenge. And so this option will examine what we need to do for F under lower recruitment regime. And I'll stop there. If there's any questions, or you can always email me or call me. Questions for Dr. Armstrong?
Not seeing any questions, Mr.
Thank you. Who's up next? Nicola?
Yep, just a couple more species to cover quickly. Menhaden, the board continued to work on a draft addendum that's looking at changes to the state-by-state allocations and some of the other provisions for catch, such as the episodic event set aside and the incidental small scale fishery provision. So basically the board, provided some additional guidance on those options, what timelines to consider for the reference period of landings to allocate the quotas, and how, there's an option to increase the amount for the episodic event set aside, one that would be particularly impactful to Maine would be potentially removing purse seines from the gears that are authorized to participate in the incidental and small scale fishery allowance, which is that 6,000 pound limit that's allowed after a state's quota has been taken. So, overall, I think one thing I would say about this addendum is that, it has the potential to change, I think not less so how much each state is landing, but how those landings are categorized in each state under these provisions, and potentially provide some more accountability so that there's not, landings outside the state quotas that could potentially one day lead to exceeding the TAC. But that's expected to be approved for public comment at the next meeting. So we'd be looking at some ASMFC hearings in the state in late winter or early spring. And then on the last slide, quickly, just the seasonal allocation of the Area 1A sub-ACL was set for Atlantic herring, status quo with prior years. With spiny dogfish, I think it's likely that we're going to be looking at an increase in our state waters trip limit for next year for the fishery that begins on May 1st. The Mid-Atlantic Council recommended to NOAA Fisheries 7,500 pound trip limit. That's a 25% increase from the 6,000 pound trip limit. So the New England Council will, because this is a jointly managed species, the New England Council will be addressing that next month, and we'll see if they make a like recommendation to NOAA Fisheries. And then the ASMC decided to wait until both of the councils had made their recommendation before taking up what the state waters trip limit would be for the northern region, which spans from Maine to Connecticut. Where we share a regional quota. The other states have their own state-specific quotas and set their own trip limits according to that. And then on fluke scup and black sea bass, as well as bluefish, the harvest control rule continues to be developed. There are 4 options that will likely go to public comment pretty soon, early next year, that would change potentially kind of the way we manage the recreational fisheries for these species in 2023. There is next month a meeting of the Mid-Atlantic Council along with the ASMC management boards that will set the recreational measures, at least at the federal level, for the species. And then ASMSC will likely have to take some action early next year to determine state waters measures for the fisheries. And one other ongoing action item is the recreational commercial allocation document, which it's expected that there'll be final action on that at that joint meeting as well. But that would not be implemented until 2023 also. And that's it.
Thank you, Nicola. Questions for Nicola?
Not seeing any questions, Mr.
All right, well, I'm looking at the agenda here, Jared, and I want to put this out to commission members. According to the agenda, we have another hour of meeting. So would commission members like to take a 15-minute break, go make a sandwich, make a bowl of soup, and come back to their working desk in 15 minutes so we can conclude or move on with this commission meeting? What's the privy of commission members? How do you feel?
I feel good about that.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else?
I didn't hear what Bill said. What did he say?
He's comfortable with taking a 15-minute break.
Okay, I will agree with that, but I just gonna move on. But I mean, if we want to take a break, we take a break.
Well, if you look at the agenda, we have another hour of meeting ahead of us.
Understood.
Anybody else have comment?
On board.
All right, I'm calling for a 15-minute break. Go, ladies. It's now 11:50. I'd like to reconvene this commission meeting. Is everybody on board?
Ready here.
All right, so we've got an update on the New England Fishery Management Council? Melanie and Mike, or Melanie?
I'm here, Mr. Chair.
We were hoping to maybe move item 6A ahead of 5C. We have some folks from Calcami, which is the vendor who will be doing our recreational fishing permit program. We don't want them to tie them up with our meeting being delayed much further. Would that be objectionable?
No, let's just have some fluidity and move this meeting along. So we're going to move on
Ready to move on with that presentation?
New recreational fishing permit program.
Okay, yep, I'm ready to do that, Jared. I'll share my screen.
Screen's yours.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for shuffling the agenda around a little bit. We do have folks from the vendor on and Dan Coach from the department, so I'll start out here though. We wanted to update you today on the progress in modernizing our mass fish hunt recreational permitting system and introduce you to our new vendor, Calcami Enterprises. The mass fish hunt system is used to issue recreational saltwater fishing permits, non-commercial lobster permits, and for-hire charter and head boats for DMF, as well as mass wildlife's freshwater fishing and hunting permits. The current system has been in use since 2011, and the contract with the existing vendor expires at the end of this month. With this contract expiration date on the horizon, the Department of Fish and Game, in conjunction with DMF and Mass Wildlife, led an extensive RFI, or request for information, process to first get information on current vendors and solutions in this sector, and then a formal RFR process to solicit bids to provide the service. And that RFI and RFR process really began in the fall of 2019. So through this extensive process, Calcami was selected as the vendor in the project to transition and modernize mass fish hunt with Calcami kicked off in March. And today we have Chet Van Dellen and Matt Holden on from Calcami, and they'll have an opportunity to speak in a minute. And as a reminder, this system is paid for through the administrative handling charge and convenience fee charged to the customer. And we're happy that this new contract comes at essentially the same or even a slightly reduced cost to our customers as the previous system. The administrative handling charge has risen slightly from $1.34 per product to $1.45, but the transaction convenience fee has gone down from 3% to 2%. So the past several months have seen extensive collaboration between Calcami, the department, Mass Wildlife, and DMF to gather requirements, build, and test this new system, and that work is ongoing. And I really want to thank Dan Koch and Elaine Brewer from the Department of Fish and Game, who are leading this effort on our side, for all the work that they've put in and organizing, and it's been pretty smooth because of their leadership. Some of the improvements we'll gain with this new system include an improved mobile experience, secure login with username and password, the ability to link accounts, for example, between family members, setting up auto renewal of certain permits, and a more efficient interface for our staff and vendors. Another major addition to this system is the event management module, which will allow for integrated angler and hunter ed registration within the same program as permits are issued. Our event staff is really looking forward to using this for angler ed events next summer. And that system will also provide for easier customer communication on both the permitting side and the event side, because all that information will be in one database and the tools will be in one spot to interact with those customers. We're also really excited about the modern reporting and data analytics features of the new system. Historically, we've had some trouble pulling our data and using it for things, and that will be much improved with this new system. So the next steps leading up to the December 1st go live, which is 3 weeks away or less, will be to complete the system development and testing, customer outreach, and staff and vendor training. Calcami staff will be on site for go live and vendor training. Customer and vendor outreach will continue after go live. And it's important to note that development and new features will continue to be introduced after go live. New functionality will continue to be added. This is a long-term partnership with Calcami that DMF, the Department of Mass Wildlife, are really excited about. So we hope that this system will continue to grow. We've had a short timeline to get ready for go live since we kicked off the project in March, but it will continue to develop and improve as we go. And we do have Chet Van Dalen, who's the project manager from Calcami, on the call today, as well as Dan Koch from the department. So Dan, maybe I'll throw it to you first if you have anything to add.
Sure, thanks, Dory. I'll just take a second to introduce myself. I'm Dan Koch. I'm the IT coordinator. I work in the commissioner's office for the department. I was part of the procurement team in 2015 when we last went out to bid. Was part of led the procurement effort this time around, and I'm now the primary point of contact for the department and working with the vendor. My job is really pretty simple. My job is to get all the right voices in the room at the right moments of this project, whether that was us defining requirements, now building out an application, validating that it meets our goals. I'm very lucky. We got a lot of really smart people in the department. Makes my job pretty easy a lot of the time. Sometimes we don't have all the right voices from our department, so it's also up to me to grab additional expertise from the Secretariat's technology group, their project management group, the Executive Office of Technology and Security Services, or Operational Services Division. So getting all the right voices is important. It's going to be important as Story mentioned, going forward. This is not just about initial release. We have a great relationship with the vendor. We expect to continually improve this product to better meet the needs of our constituents, to better meet the needs of law enforcement, and a range of other issues expressed by other stakeholder groups. So we'll be bringing lots more voices into the room moving forward. I look forward to that. I think we've built a good culture around this project, one that values not just consensus building, but transparency and efficiency. So I'm really looking forward to the long-term partnership we have with Calcami, and I'll turn it over to them to let you know a little bit more about who they are and what they bring to the table.
Thanks, Dan. I'm gonna try and share my screen here. Just a couple of slides about Calcami. Thanks, Story. Let's see here. Looks like I'm not able to share.
You should be able to do that now, Chet. I didn't know
Okay,
you were on slides.
Can you all see that there?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So my name is Chet Van Dalen. I'm the director of the project management office here at Calcami Enterprises, and we've been working very closely with the Department of Massachusetts Fish and Game, including the wildlife and the marine fisheries collaborators on this project. Calcami, or I just want to take a minute to introduce Calcami as a whole, and then just talk a little bit about kind of what we're doing for the department and for the divisions here. So Calcami has been in the outdoor recreation space since the mid-90s. We started in education, specifically around boating and eventually hunter education, and now offer over 35 courses in outdoor recreation safety and training classes. Over the years, we realized that our partnerships with state agencies, both in the US and Canada, provincial agencies, are really looking for not only our expertise in the outdoor safety and education space, but we could leverage our partnerships and our connections across all of these agencies into a technology platform that would provide a comprehensive solution for volunteer and event management, license sales, vehicle and vessel registrations, and a whole host of other suites of tools that state agencies could benefit from. So about 5 years ago, we started building our technology group within CalCMI to develop software that we call AMS, Agency Management Solutions. And we're very happy to be partnering with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to provide that solution to both the Division of Wildlife and the Division of Marine Fisheries. We focus on innovation and partnership with our customers. And we do that from a space that recognizes both the need and the purpose of what our agency partners are trying to do. Our goals are to give you the tools that can leverage your constituents and the fees that they pay to your agency in a way that lets you put maximum conservation, both in terms of wildlife and habitat, into practice on the ground. Our Chief Executive Officer, Gail Anderson, has been the executive sponsor on all of our technology products, working with our state partners, and especially with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, from the top of our company all the way down through our technology business unit. Mitch Strobel is the Executive VP and General Manager of our software branch, which encompasses the AMS solution that the Commonwealth has procured. And then myself as the project manager, specifically working with Story and Dan and all of our other stakeholders on implementing our AMS solution for license sales and event management in Massachusetts. We bring a lot of expertise to the table. We have developed a team of experts both in the software development space as well as the hunting and fishing licensing space that combine over 80 years of combined industry experience. And we've implemented through the course of our team's history well over 20 licensing platforms across the United States and Canada. We've got nearly 150 staff members behind this project, including business analysts, hunting and fishing licensing, subject matter experts, technologists, and enthusiasts. And that really speaks to what we bring to bear, both in our experience in the outdoor industry as providers of a solution, but many of us are also users of the system. You know, we have a lot of anglers, a lot of hunters, a lot of volunteerism in our company that really understands what an agency is looking for. I myself have 10 years of experience in the technology space working for state agencies. And before coming to CalCMI, I was the Chief of Data and Technology for the state of Nevada, and really bring a lot of understanding and insight to what not only your agency is trying to do, but your constituents are trying to do with our software. Finally, we are backed by a private equity firm, Cove Hill Partners, which is a Massachusetts native. They're based in Boston, and they focus on long-term technology partnerships to build the best possible technology that they can offer to their customers. So top to bottom, we are not only bringing a lot of experience and innovation in the technology space, but a lot of local expertise and agency insights to what we offer to our customers. It's just a high-level introduction to us as a company. We wanted to keep this pretty brief, but we have been working with Story and Dan and everyone else involved on this project for the past several months, and look forward to bringing this out to the public on December 1st. We will be on site at the Westboro office, both from a software launch support role, as well as on site across the Commonwealth, supporting the vendors around the state that are selling the licensing products to the public and their constituents. We're excited to be there. I myself am based in the Northeast. I'm up in Vermont, so I have a lot of good access to our Northeast customer base, and I'm excited to be down in Massachusetts in early December to get this system out in the world and supporting the agency and everything they do. I think we have a few questions. I don't know if the agenda supports it, but we're happy to discuss anything if we do have a couple of questions right now. But I do want to be mindful that you guys have a lot on your plate today, and we'll kind of go from there.
Thanks, Chet. Dan, did you have your hand up as well?
I did. So just to ground this for the commission members and give the commission members some orientation as to why we thought this would be relevant to today's meeting. We issue recreational lobster permits around 3,000 a year, and also the charter permits, which are a form of a commercial business, as well as a couple of 100,000 recreational fishing permits each year. And so I'm expecting that this new product will give us more responsiveness. And maybe, Story, you can speak to what we expect these advantages to be. I know Chairman Kane is a hunter, so he'll be interacting with this new product himself for his hunting permits, and maybe Khalil as well. But in the case of our DMF needs, Story, what do you expect to be improved for this new vendor?
I think it's the optimization for mobile. I think it's efficiencies in getting your permits across all the different categories you just mentioned. I think it's the new event management piece of it as well for our Angler Ed opportunities, and that'll be a much bigger advantage on the hunting side, as they're going to bring all their programs that have kind of been managed in disparate fashions together into this system. So I think it's going to be more of a one-stop shop for the Massachusetts outdoors person, really. And there's big advantages there.
Will we be able to obtain more catch data, like from our recreational sector, as a result of this new product?
Sure, I think this new product has more flexibility. We're just now building out some of those features for example, for our recreational lobster permit, but there is more functionality there. And beyond collecting it, we'll be able to access it and use that data better. That's a huge plus for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And yeah, anything else, Dan?
So, Story, this is Ray Kane. So beyond MREP, you're saying that this new company will be able to collect data from recreational fishermen?
Well, we haven't gone there yet. We haven't talked to them about it, but I think there's more functionality. There's more possibilities here for the future.
Well, yeah, let me address that. The current system under Mass Fish Hunt, at renewal time, each recreational lobster permit holder records the number of lobsters they harvested, number of traps they fished, I believe, and the statistical area they intend to fish the following year. So, but this data has been very, very difficult for us to access. So I'm hopeful that in this new system, that will be much easier for our analysts.
Okay, and I had one other question, Story, from an AP member. What's the time frame on this contract?
So Dan and Chet, help me out here, but I believe the initial contract is 3 years and then 7 potential 1-year extensions. Is that right?
That's correct, Story.
Okay. So an initial 3-year contract and then potential for 7 1-year extensions.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to add, because I forgot to say this earlier, but at the December 6th recreational panel meeting, we'll have another presentation on this. It'll be a little bit more in depth.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Questions from commission members? Jared, any hands raised?
I was just giving it a second to see, and no.
Okay, so you're going to meet again on December 6th with the recreational advisory panel, Story?
That's correct.
With an in-depth presentation.
Yes, more in depth than this. Yep.
All right. Thank you. Well, if we're discussing this item, can we go back to 5C? New England Fishery Management Council updates. Melanie?
I'm here, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie.
Yeah, I'll provide a report of the council's activities. Let's see, since August 18th was, I think, the last time I gave you an update, and through today. And during that time, the council did hold its September meeting. Jared, I'm going to pause for a second. Are you able to bring up the slides?
That would be Jared, I presume.
Mhm.
I'm working on it.
Okay. And I'll work quickly through these, Mr. Chair. Try not to take too much time.
There you go.
Thank you. So I'm just going to touch on a few quick items in terms of the council leadership that was appointed at the September meeting, the outcomes from that meeting, the outlook for December, and a few additional updates that I think will be of interest to the commission. So next slide, Jared. So just quickly in terms of leadership and committees, Eric Reed was appointed to be the chair. Rick Bellavance is the new vice chair. And we have a few new committee members on the executive committee, including John Papalardo and Megan Ware. I was reappointed. So that includes Eric and Rick as well, and that rounds out the leadership. So I do want to take a second to note that there was the Janice Plant Award, which was presented to Frank Meraki. You know, he was recognized for his amazing on the water knowledge and extensive history of engagement on the regional fisheries management plans and issues, actually predating the Magnuson-Stevens Act itself. And Frank is so widely respected. He's a great resource and a really trustworthy person to engage with on fisheries. And I'll just note he was also a previous recipient of the Commonwealth Belding Award. So great all around award and moment for Frank. So in terms of the September outcomes, herring was one of the big decision points. We did finalize a rebuilding plan that was based on Amendment 8 biomass-based control rule. And we did approve some sub-ACL overage tolerances under certain conditions. As a quick side note, Nick touched on approval of the upcoming quotas, but the Area 1A fishery was just opened and closed yesterday, Monday, November 8th. So that wraps up that fishery in 1A for the rest of the 2021 fishing year. It was a good example, again, of the states, Maine, New Hampshire, and Mass, really able to come together to react quickly and shut it down. NIMS, you'll notice there's a NIMS notices come out that it's a little later trigger. So it's great that the states can react so quickly when we're dealing with small quotas of a high volume fishery. We also, the council in September approved final skate specifications. These are for the 2022 and 2023 fishing years. It was complicated by some survey gaps due to the pandemic, but the Science and Statistical Committee were able to provide revised catch limit recommendations that result in about a 14% increase from the previous limits. These are just tracking survey increases. For groundfish, in September, we approved some of the catch limits for the shared groundfish stocks, the US-Canada shared stocks. Those are Georges Bank Yellowtail and the Eastern Georges Bank stocks of cod and haddock. These were as recommended by the Transboundary Management Guidance Committee. And so those will be incorporated into Framework 63, which will be finalized in December. I'll just quickly note that the TMGC is likely to hold 1 or 2 intersessional meetings to further discuss and finalize data limited approaches. These are the approaches that are being used to assess both Georges Bank Yellowtail and Eastern Georges Bank cod. They're meant to be interim approaches until we can get back into analytical. So those that are interested, you might want to pay attention to that. And then finally, there's some correspondence of note with the council's letter on National Standard 1 technical guidance specifically on data limited stocks. There's ongoing discussion at the Council Coordination Committee about additional National Standard 1 guidance, including biological reference points and the use of proxies. Next slide, Jared. So looking ahead to December, I think we're meeting the second week of December. Right now, it's looking like it may be a hybrid with in-person and webinar. I think there's some issues with federal staff still attending in person, but we'll have a final announcement on that soon. Janet Coit, the Assistant Administrator for NOAA Fisheries, is going to be attending. So be good to talk to her, especially on things like the pending herring disaster aid, to see where that is, and certainly can touch base with her on other items of interest. So the December agenda includes, one of the main things will be to finalize our 2022 management priorities. With over 110 proposed priorities, I'm not going to go into any detail, but if any commission members want to discuss, please feel free to call or email me. The species committees have been meeting and will be providing their suggested prioritizations, and those will go to the executive committee, and then the full council will take action in December. There are also 3 final actions that will be scheduled for December. Groundfish Framework 63, as I noted earlier. I'll point out that this may include, actually, I think that's for the next coming up, but there's a topic on zeroing out the catch limits for Georges Bank Yellowtail to avoid additional AMs. That's actually likely to be a 2022 priority. So the Framework 63 should have Georges Bank cod recreational catch target review. That stock, Georges Bank cod, is actually taking precedence over Gulf of Maine cod and Southern New England mid-Atlantic winter flounder in terms of rebuilding measures. We'll have some time to address those latter 2 stocks in the next vehicle if we don't do anything in this one. Scallop Framework 34 is scheduled. That's also our 2022 measures for access area and open area fishing, various other annual specifications, as well as default. And then Skate Framework 9, which this has been an evolution over time. Started out as Amendment 5. This was the action that was going to consider limited access in the skate fishery, and it really got hollowed out over time. Back in September, basically the remaining considerations were moved into a framework. So this is now Framework 9, which seeks to clarify skate FMP objectives and adjust the federal skate permitting and basically that interplay between fishing for skates and state and federal waters. It's kind of one of those things that we've addressed over the years in other fisheries like groundfish. And so now we're trying to deal with this, perhaps making the federal permit year round and restricting switching between state and federal permits. So next slide, Jared. So this is my final slide, Mr. Chair. Just a few quick updates. There was a SK grant that's awarded to Dr. Lisa Kerr, who's the new SSC chair, and Dr. Steve Cadron, who is down at SMAS and our MFI co-chair. And they're going to be conducting a management strategy evaluation on cod stock structure, which of course is timely given all the work being done on that and the upcoming stock assessment. And the goal of that research is to evaluate the performance of alternative management procedures at resolving this identified mismatch in the scale of biological population and management units of Atlantic cod. So those researchers will be looking to engage with fishery stakeholders. So again, keep your eyes peeled, and I'll certainly pass along information as I receive it on any workshops or meetings. MSA reauthorization, I believe Mike Piernock mentioned this earlier. It has been introduced in the House and it's been referred to various committee in the House, and it is likely, other more important issues like budget negotiations are likely to delay action on that bill, but we'll see how that goes. It's been a long time since we had MSA reauthorization, and this is the first time it's kind of come more to the forefront. EBFM, ecosystem-based fisheries management workshops. Bill, you've been talking about this need to consider ecosystems. I really do encourage members as well as staff and myself to go to the council's EBFM webpage and really start digging into the documents and the example fishery ecosystem plan. This is for Georges Bank, and that's going to go out to public workshops in the near future. The hang-up has been the preference is to have these in person, given the difficult nature of the density of the topic and just wanting to engage better with stakeholders. So, but there is a wealth of information on the webpage right now. So I do encourage folks to go there and putter through the documents. I know the EBFM committee chair, John Papalardo, is more than willing to sit down and talk through some of these things with folks if they're interested. East Coast climate change scenario planning, those workshops, there were some initial introductory workshops for stakeholders that have been held. I think there may be an update from the NRCC that we'll get at the December meeting, so I can update you after that. There's also been an October Council Coordination Committee. Recall, this is the body that consists of the chairs and the vice chairs and the executive directors of each of the regional fishery management councils. They meet twice a year and discuss issues that are relevant to all the councils. And they did go through a couple topics. In the interest of time, Mr. Chair, I'm not going to go into any details, but they talked about implementation of MSA, climate change resiliency, a bunch of the recent executive orders, including that America the Beautiful, which contains the 30 by 30 initiative. Eric Reed is leading an area-based management subcommittee, which is looking to provide a report on all the area-based measures within the various councils and discussing kind of the pros and cons of that approach. And I think there's more information on the CCC's website in terms of their recent meeting if you want to go and see what they've been up to. Now, the last item, I do want to take a few minutes, and I'm sure Dan will want to add a few things as well. This is an emerging issue, Atlantic mackerel rebuilding. So since this summer, the MID has been presented with a rebuilding issue. This is not so much a change in status as a lack of rebuilding issue. And so it's triggered action at the Mid-Atlantic. And this summer and fall, the MID has responded to these rebuilding concerns by requesting emergency action to curtail this year's catch. And NMFS did respond, and they closed the fishery on October 15th. So there's a 5,000 pound incidental limit in place. And it is anticipated that NMFS will issue interim rules to address those necessary reductions in the 2022 fishing year as well. I think they said the end of this month, they might plan to have more information out on potential interim rules. So the other step that the MID is taking is to revise its rebuilding plan. It's currently a 5 or 6 year rebuilding plan, and they're really looking at 10 years now. And it has several options under analysis. Final action is tentatively planned for April 2022. And as I just mentioned, these options mostly look at 10-year rebuilding periods and do address concerns about poor recent recruitment. This is something we're seeing in so many stocks now, right? Like herring and others, about long-term recruitment assumptions and whether those can really hold true in the short term. So what's bringing this back to us in the Commonwealth is that the MID is hoping that somewhat concurrently, the states will be enacting measures to curtail recreational catch. The MID has identified the lack of recreational measures, both in state and federal waters, but they have estimated about 18% of recreational catch is coming from federal waters. So the recreational fisheries, predominantly state waters. And so it's a real focus by the MID for reduction. The Commonwealth, along with other states, including Maine, we did just receive a letter on November 3rd that formally requested the states take action and reduce catch by at least 50%. So what the division is planning in terms of a response at this point, we're targeting a comment deadline for the Mid-Atlantic's December meeting when they next take up discussion of rebuilding and appropriate management responses. Our goal is really to provide some much needed context and details, not just on the recreational fishery in state waters, but actually all the commercial fisheries that are conducted here in Massachusetts. That includes like the weirs on the North Shore, jigging, midwater trawl usage, and others. So for instance, on the recreational side, if a possession prohibition is pursued, which is what the feds have been throwing out there for the EEZ, what does this mean for things like the use of frozen bait? On the commercial side, what might an ongoing incidental limit of 5,000 pounds actually mean for some of these participants? Might we lose some particular fisheries? So like groundfish and right whales, it takes a village when it comes to fisheries management, and we've got several staff working on all these fronts to flush out an initial recommendation memo. During that process, we'll certainly be reaching out to folks like Mike Piernock and others, and we'll be talking with the other states, namely Maine and New Hampshire, to possibly provide a coordinated response. So in terms of rulemaking at the state level, I would think we'd be coming back to the commission sometime after December, the December Mid-Atlantic, for a more detailed discussion. But just to give you a quick summary of the issue, and Dan, if you have anything to add into that, I'm done.
Yeah, I guess a question, Melanie. The next commission meeting is December 2nd, and so of this commission. So how quickly are we trying to put that letter together for the mids deliberation?
Yeah, so that the comment deadline for the mids is December 9th. So I would be looking maybe at the January commission meeting, or we can have a discussion before that letter. I leave that up to you, what you think is best.
Yeah,
there,
I think it would be valuable to get the input of some of our commission members involved with recreational fisheries. I'm thinking maybe a small subcommittee that we could meet with virtually and talk about what we think of some of the issues. I'm thinking Ray, Mike Peerdenock, maybe Tim Brady and Khalil, since it's predominant. We're addressing the recreational take. And just one observation that we had in our internal call, so much of what's estimated to be the recreational take, however, if that's the right word, has to do with fish caught and retained for bait purposes. For use in striped bass fishing and also for other pelagics such as tuna. And so I'm not sure how one goes about regulating that. And I think that's the kind of stuff that we need to bring in some of our commission member experts. I'd really like to get their input before we finalize that letter, if we could. So maybe we can
absolutely.
put
And
something together.
And again, we're really trying to provide that context. It's not going to be the be all end all of recommendations, but absolutely. We had a internal staff call just yesterday, and we are trying to work really quickly. So we're hoping to get you further details by like the 19th or 22nd. It's a little complicated with Thanksgiving then. So yeah, maybe a subcommittee just right before the December 2nd commission meeting would be good.
So just so our commission knows, the recreational harvest that is attributed through MRIP is about 99% non-Mid-Atlantic states. It's from Rhode Island to Maine, and that's a problem because we've got Mid-Atlantic Council asking states to regulate their fisheries, and we're not even at the table. So that's why this really set me off in terms of making sure that our issues are understood and are heard by the Mid-Atlantic Council. So Ray, could we have a subcommittee or a four of you that we could have a conference call with as we develop some of our positions, that are things we want to bring to the attention of the Mid-Atlantic Council through correspondence?
Yes, by all means. And then I have a question for Melanie.
Go ahead. I'm done.
Yeah, congratulations, Melanie. You got appointed to the executive committee. And I see the new chair and co-chair are both from Rhode Island. And if I'm not mistaken, they've been ambassadors to the Mid-Atlantic for the New England Fishery Management Council. And I don't think the council's format has changed. They're going to be very busy people, both the chair and co-chair. So my question to you, now that you're on the executive committee, is the council thinking about appointing a new ambassador from the New England Fishery Management Council to the MID?
Well, I'm not sure. There's quite a few council members that actually engage at the MID, and that's going to include a few DMF staffers now. There are various liaisons. I think Rick still is the official liaison, but they're like Nick is serving on the dogfish. I'm actually going to be serving on the mackerel, squid, butterfish, mainly because of the mackerel issue. I'm trying to think of a few others. I think Mike Armstrong was just appointed to serve on the river herring shad. So there's definitely a representation from the agency through the New England Council on the Mid-Atlantic.
Thank you.
Bill Amaru?
Thank you. Thank you, Melanie. Very good summation. I want to emphasize the need for Massachusetts and the other New England states to be very, very careful and to observe very closely and participate to the extent that's possible in the management of mackerel for the future. This is a stock that's definitely shifting its territory range to the north. It's becoming an extremely important part of the fishery for the outer Cape and Cape Cod ports and along the South Shore ports as well. It's taking the place of what was once a directed groundfish fishery, and it's caught by virtually everybody who goes out on the water. The population has been so tremendous in recent years. I understand the need for looking at ways to conserve and rebuild. Perhaps there is a bit of the overfishing that's taken place. I really couldn't tell. I go out and fill the boat up virtually every time I go offshore. Finding these things isn't that difficult, but we have, as Massachusetts managers, we have to be very, very intent to see that this fishery is managed properly for our region, and this resources remains healthy for us, as well as for the rest of the mid and the other areas where it goes. But I'm very happy to hear that it's high on the list for the council. I think it should be a co-managed resource myself between the mid and New England, but that's neither here nor there for now. Again, thank you, and I ask Dan to remain very astute and diligent in managing this. Thanks.
Yeah, Bill, if I can add lib, I'm very happy to see Melanie being appointed to that Mid-Atlantic to discuss mackerel. She's a sharp tack, another sharp tack from DMF. And in the future, I would suggest that you talk directly to Melanie about mackerel.
Will do.
Thank you.
Here, Doc.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Melanie. I'll save my comments on mackerel for when we get together. We've already, had some exchanges about it, but there is one point that Dan made, about the fact that this is a mid-Atlantic species. Climatic shift has resulted in this species now being in the New England states, yet it is managed by the Mid-Atlantic, where they have the votes. We only have a liaison that votes at the committee level and doesn't vote at the Mid-Atlantic Council level. So my question for you, Dan or Melanie, is has there been any experience to date with changing the management of such species as a result of the shift of stocks? Or is that more to come? Because as you pointed out, and I agree, there's multiple examples of this, and we basically have no control.
Yeah, I guess what I would respond to you with is that there's very high level discussions about this common, this is not the only stock that we have this concern with. And so this kind of discussion happens on so many levels. There's been some really actionable discussion at the ASMC level. There is at the CCC and NRCC level, so that really high level discussion. I'm not aware of anything specific like the Magnuson-Stevens reauthorization bill that's before. You'll see that there's actually language for Rhode Island to become a seat at the Mid-Atlantic, but there's nothing for any other state, and there's nothing specific to mackerel. So that's definitely a conversation that needs to be pursued, continue to be pursued, and not just at that 10,000 foot level.
Thank you. One other thing, just to add to what Bill mentioned, we have no lack of small ones, medium or large ones in our waters. But as I speak to fishermen, commercial, rec, and so on from Maine to the Cape, and south of the Cape, there's no lack of mackerel in tremendous numbers. So that, as we all know, that's difficult when those in the public see a proposed cut when it's not consistent with their observations. So just another example of climatic shift, and I look forward to participating in that subcommittee concerning this matter. Thank you.
Jared?
No further comments on this. We can move to 6B.
Okay, we're back to the CARES Program Review and Seafood Processing Grant. Who's got this one, Dan?
Kevin Creighton.
Kevin, you're a co-host, so the share screen ability is yours.
Morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. How are you?
How are you feeling these days?
I am doing pretty good. How you doing?
Good to hear. Happy to hear.
Let me make sure I get the. Can you guys see my screen?
I see your name highlighted, but I don't see your screen. There it is.
Okay.
Round 2 CARES Act Program Timeline.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I'll be quick. You should have kept the order out of order and let Melanie be the closer. That was a great summary. This, as you know, CARES. We've been doing updates all along as this program's evolved, and we finally wrapped it up. You can see we were pretty aggressive on the timeline for this. We had our goal of ending the program by September and then turning it over to ASMFC to cut the checks for us by the first week of October. And as I'll steal a line from Melanie, it takes a village. The only way we could be this aggressive and get this done that quickly is we had over 30% of DMF staff helped out in some fashion on this program, whether they were chairing one of the sectors or stuffing envelopes. And in addition, we even had the chairman of the MFC helped out. He hosted one of our workshops and he would stay the whole time directing people where to go. So DMF and MFC chair, we got it done. So you might recall that the only real difference, we had a lot of success with round 1 and we built round 2 modeled after that, with the only caveat being that we took 10% of the funds allocated to the sectors and set that aside because there was early on indications that greater loss was occurring in the for-hire and aquaculture sectors. And we wanted to run all 4 programs simultaneously this time, all 4 sectors, and then evaluate those applications that came in and direct funds where they were most needed. As it turned out, as this wrapped up, there were actually fewer applications that came in aquaculture, for example, or for hire. And so it made a lot of sense just to push the money back where it came from. So in round 1, we had almost $28 million, round 2, $23 million. And that column of round 2, that is the final numbers that were allocated for each sector. So, looking at payments for recipients, you can see that round 1 versus round 2, seafood processor was very similar. But if you look down towards aquaculture, the numbers were a lot lower, and that did surprise us. Some of this might have been, though, other programs were out there that were available for funding on the commercial sector. We know in aquaculture, the tariff program. So people were able to make up for some of their loss through those programs, those other programs that were out there. And with the CARES program, you could not be made more than whole. And any of you guys that were involved in this or got an application understands what that means. Your traditional revenue from 2020, you couldn't exceed that with the money that you did make, plus CARES payments, plus other CARES relief. So when it was all said and done, the seafood dealers actually, if you just look at orange versus blue here, in round 2, their share value is slightly less than it was in round 1. But all the other sectors, the commercial sector, slightly higher. And part of the reason is, again, even though we had less money, we had fewer applicants and fishermen were made whole. So they either did not apply or they maxed out on that payment. So that was the same in all the other sectors, commercial, aquaculture. You can see share value was higher, round 2, head boats and for hire charter. So that was actually good. Like I said, we did wrap this up end of September, and I actually waited until I sent the spreadsheet to ASMFC to process those checks and had a planned vacation. Went off to the mountains to go hiking for a week, completely out of touch. And when I returned, I heard there'd been a glitch with ASMFC's bank, which caused checks that they sent to our industry to bounce. So it was unfortunate. I did hear around the office that a lot of my coworkers thought it odd that I was on vacation, out of reach, out of touch, and $23 million went missing. Assure you that was not the case. And thanks to the hard work of Stephanie, Maggie, and Dan, they cleared my name as well as the checks that was sent out to the industry. So at this point, CARES 2 is done. And those remaining issues have been resolved. So as we move on from CARES, just wanted to touch on this one real quickly. Some of you may have already heard about this. There's also another small grant program out there that DMF will be administering. It provides fund to support seafood processors. And this is for costs that they incurred in response to the pandemic. So where CARES was providing funds to cover loss, this specifically provides funds to cover costs that they incurred. And overall, it's a $700 million program, broad program run by USDA, and there's a $50 million earmark specific for the seafood processor sector. And then out of that, Massachusetts, it's already been determined we'll get 1.1 million roughly. We know that we have around 300 processors. Not sure how many are going to be applying, but you can see that the payments for this to cover those costs that they incurred aren't going to be that great as compared to the CARES. They're going to be a whole lot smaller. This program is not nearly as flexible either as CARES, where it's already been determined what costs can be covered. So these are the categories, and they're pretty obvious. I think workplace safety. It's the hand cleaners and masks, all that kind of stuff for PPE. Market pivots. We heard about some dealers looking to enhance their online capabilities, so you could buy fish online and then drive through and have the fish pass through your window where nobody has to get out of the car. So some of those costs, changes to facilities like all the plexiglass that we've been seeing going up. They were adding tents to maintain social distancing, but still have a footprint where they could do their work. And some of the smaller things like transportation or housing, medical costs that may have not been reimbursed. And as I said, this particular grant program, we don't have the flexibility that we had with CARES, and we are being told that these are the costs that you can cover. And the USDA wants all the states to survey their industry to sort of predetermine where those costs are going to be spent and how we'll be spending that money out of the grant. So we've actually already done that. We did an online survey with all of our seafood processors and got pretty good response. And this is where they reported their monies were spent to deal with those COVID-related expenses, to deal with it. So a little bit of a surprise to me, I think, that market pivots was the highest. But anyway, this will be included in our grant application that's going to the feds. And I think the dates, well, this was actually, I put these slides together prior to the previous meeting that got canceled. So at this point, we've already done, step 1 is done, the survey's done, we've got the response, and step 2 is pretty much done. We've completed our application, and that will be submitted next Friday through the online portal to the USDA. And over the month of December, we're going to develop outreach material. We'll reach out to all the dealers. We'll build our webpage, let people know that it's coming. It doesn't actually start until January 1st. And the administrative burden on this particular program is it's going to be kind of high because we don't have ASMFC as a partner for cutting checks this time. It's all going to be EFT through the state, which means every one of these dealers is going to have to be made a dealer with the state. And there's a requirement that the dealers that do apply are going to have to itemize what their costs are, and then DMF is going to have to audit at least 5% of those. So we're thinking it's going to take us maybe 5 months to give the dealers plenty of time to submit their applications, for us to get them loaded into our state accounting system and then do the audits that are required. And the goal is around next July to have the EFTs sent out. So we're looking at about 7 months to complete the program. The feds are allowing up to 2 years, but again, it's not a lot of money. Our universe is small, so we don't see any problem in wrapping this up by early next summer. And that is it.
Thank you, Kevin. Questions for Kevin?
Not seeing any hands, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Melanie. All right, we're going to move on to other business. This is where we go around the round table. So let's start with Khalil.
I'm all set, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Bill Amaru.
Yes, it's been a very good meeting, and I'm all set as well. Thank you.
Tim Brady.
Tim is absent.
Bill Doyle is absent. Shelley Edmondson.
Thanks. I have no comment. Thank you, though.
Lou Williams.
Yeah, all set, right? Thanks.
Soupy is absent. Michael Peardnock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All set.
And I had one question, but I think I answered the question in my own head, Dan, on the dredging issues on Cape Cod, on the seasonality of different species when DMF has to write permits where towns can dredge. That's gone to a DNA gene pool study?
Yeah, it's called the eDNA, and it's trying to detect the presence of winter flounder DNA in the water column. It's a project our staff are working on. But I think what would be most appropriate, because I know it's an issue that's important to Bill, is to set up an in-person or a virtual meeting with my Habitat staff, Mark Russo, who took over for Catherine Ford. And so there's a project going on down here around the Cape estuaries that Mike Armstrong and Bill Hoffman and others are working in the Boston Harbor region to look at winter flounder spawning times and locations. So I know this is an issue that's important to Bill. So why don't I try to set up a meeting with Bill, because for him it's a lot about the dredging time windows, and we can get Mark in on that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's important to all of the Cape Cod towns, but be more specific. When are we going to see results from this study, this ongoing study? That would be my question.
That's a good question, and I'll try to bring that up with the staff, and we'll try to address that in the meeting, and then we can report back to the commission. So the answer, I don't know, but
Okay.
I'll get that for you.
Okay, so you don't know. That's a good answer, because I have to answer the people. So what's the thought about coming back to live in-person meetings? January?
That is where I'm looking. I mean, obviously, winter meetings are all weather dependent. We can always shift to virtual meetings if we need to accommodate a weather event, as the open meeting law remains in effect through April, allowing for virtual meetings. But we'd be looking at either the Westboro facility or a hotel for the January meeting. That's my intention now, and then I think maybe at the December meeting we carve out some time to talk about how we want to manage the meeting schedule going forward. I know we have some folks that want to go back to in-person meetings, and I've also heard comments from others who like the flexibility of virtual. I know, Ray, you and I discussed maybe about toggling, so I think that's probably worthy of some additional discussion at the December meeting as to how we want to approach these meetings in 2022.
Okay, and I would
Well,
just,
setting meeting dates for 2022.
I would suggest that we start adding an hour to these commission meetings, because
Half hour at either end.
yeah, if commission members can abide by that, start at 8:30 and end at 12:30 or 9 to 1, but 3 hours certainly isn't enough time. Because I don't want to run through everything and just, okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean, we are here to discuss things as commission members. So that would be a suggestion. All right, that's all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to go to the public. Anybody in the public have comment?
Remember, the public can have a comment. Please raise your hand. I'll recognize you. Not seeing any hands raised from the public, Mr. Chair.
Have we got any public on?
So Patrick Cat and a bunch of DMF staff.
Okay, thank you. Well, then I'm going to put it out there. Motion to adjourn. I need a motion. Hello?
Move to adjourn, Khalil here.
Thank you, Khalil. Need a second?
Shelley, second it.
Thank you, Shelley. There's no opposition. Motion
Not seeing any
stands.
opposition.
We are now adjourned. Thank you. Thank you all.